I was thinking. Yes, thank you for noticing. Hmm? Yeah, they're pouring in. Oh, yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming here. I'm Jeffrey Abramson. My wife, Rona, and I, a great pleasure in welcoming you to this morning's conversation a, on a new science for peace, research on meditation, the brain, trauma, and peace. It's especially exciting to be here at American University, and I'd like to especially thank the School of International Service for hosting us and partnering us this morning. Um, we are the Abramson Center for Peace, um, a division of the David Lynch Foundation, and we have a long history. The Abramson family has a long history with American University, and it's a great pleasure to see that tradition continue today to explore a new science of peace. I wanted to particularly acknowledge several people from American University today. Valerie Vera, Associate Director of Veteran Services, Tracy Calandrillo, Executive Director of Counseling, Mark Schaefer, Chaplain, Tony Hollinger, Director of Initiatives for Student Engagement and Diversity, Christine Chin, Interim Dean of the School of International Service, Mary Clark, Dean of the Academic Affairs and Senior Vice Provost, and Courtney Searles, Vice President of Development and Alumni Relations. Thank you all for being here. I think many of us would agree that we are living in an epidemic of trauma and toxic stress, really everywhere, but especially among vulnerable at-risk populations, children living in poverty and crime and attending under-resourced schools, women survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, and veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress. This mental and physical trauma can often be seen as a crucial causal factor in much of the sickness, crime, and violence we see within families, communities, and entire societies. Today, we will explore 40 years of research and applications on one form of meditation, Transcendental Meditation, commonly referred to as TM, for addressing this terrible epidemic. We will look at the effectiveness for healing and preventing toxic stress, and we will review its global impact in highly stressed communities within the United States and worldwide. There will be two phases to this morning's presentation. The first presentation, we will look at the impact of TM on health and peace. Next, we will look at the healing hidden wounds of war and training resilient warriors. Third, we will hear about the Quiet Time program and the effectiveness of the TM in classroom in overcoming stress and raising performance. Then we will take a short break. Following that, we will hear about programs in Washington, D.C., including the creation of a City of Peace with our project at the Ark in Anacostia. And finally, we will hear about a brain-based approach to peace, which is at the very core of our exploration of a new science of peace. I'd like to begin with a very short video that will introduce you to the work of the David Lynch Foundation, and then I will turn it over to our host, the great Candy Crowley, who needs absolutely no introduction, and Bob Roth, the CEO of the David Lynch Foundation and a great friend of ours. Thank you very much.
The idea of what you're doing, of putting this into schools, I think is a fabulous thing.
Before, I held everything in, and when I couldn't take it anymore, I took it out on somebody else. Now, it just goes away now.
I feel like all the stress is just leaving my body, all the situations and problems are just clearing out.
I got more concentration, I social better, everything just like 2 times better, basically.
It took me roughly 5 years to admit that I had PTSD. Transcendental meditation has taken the stress out of my life. It has made me relax. The anger's gone.
Just because you can't see a wound doesn't mean it's not there. To know that something as small of a concept of 20 minutes twice a day can make me feel like I feel now, that's a gift that you can't buy.
Within 90 days, I was off all the anxiety pills, antidepressants, the pain medication. You don't have to suffer anymore. There's a better way.
I didn't know I had post-traumatic stress. The first experience meditating with TM, my body got a chance to just really relax. And my self-esteem is a lot better than it's ever been in my entire life.
When I started meditating, it changed my demeanor. I really felt like it changed the dynamics for me, the way I responded or interacted with people. And also not sitting like this, sitting like this, because I got rest.
I went through a really dark time in my life where I didn't want to wake up in the morning at all. Now when I wake up in the morning, I feel happy, I feel blessed.
Meditation has significantly helped my recovery, and I think it should be taught in every rehab facility there is.
Transcendental meditation is the only proven form of meditation to reduce blood pressure. It affects the cortisol, the epinephrine. The whole system just relaxes.
When people start to meditate, they're doing things more effectively and more efficiently, and time seems to open up.
I meditate before every performance now. I find that it keeps me out of my head. It's a much more enjoyable way to perform. TM has helped me to be more open to new possibilities.
I really have found that I am more aware of those stressful moments that are still going to happen even after meditation, but my reaction to them. I recognize them, and I just am at a peaceful state.
You have to give yourself a break. You have to give yourself a moment to revive, unplug, rejuvenate, and Transcendental Meditation does that for me.
I think this is what people need. They don't need high-minded talk so much as results.
Real change for the good truly begins within.
My name is Bob Roth, and I'm the CEO of the David Lynch Foundation. And unlike Candy Crowley, I do need an introduction. I'm very grateful to Rona and Jeffrey Abramson for establishing the Rona and Jeffrey Abramson Center for Peace, a division of the David Lynch Foundation. I'm incredibly grateful to American University, particularly for the School of International Service, an amazing institution. The more I hear about it, the more I want to be like them. And I have a question for you. How many of you here have practiced some form of meditation? How many of you have never tried any form of meditation? Times have changed. Times have changed. Why? Why is it that we're having a conference here, we're talking about the effects of transcendental meditation and its use on military bases and shelters for women who are survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, and some of the biggest, largest businesses in America and the world, and schools. Why? Why is meditation in general, what happened to the tipping point? Why is meditation, which used to be weird, and you didn't want to sort of talk about it in polite company, and now we're looking seriously at this technique, at techniques for addressing some very serious problems. I think there's 3 reasons. I think the problem of stress is worse than ever. We know with our kids, 24/7 plugged in. We also know the impact of stress on the brain and on the nervous system, the body, behavior, which we didn't know before. So the impact of stress, Surgeon General in the past one time said, if Americans are swimming in an ocean of stress, our children are drowning in it. Well, we're all kids because we're all drowning in it. Second, for the interest, why? Why now? Well, modern medicine hasn't given any magic pill that we can take, that we could take to prevent trauma and stress. We can't give a pill to that young man or woman who goes off into harm's way. We can't give a pill to the young single mom who's dealing with so many pressures at home. We can't give a pill to the guy or the woman who's going to work and dealing with the pressures of the workplace. To prevent or cure. And finally, the real reason I think why there's so much interest in meditation in general and specifically transcendental meditation, science, science, and more science. There's so much research now on the brain impact of meditation in general and specifically transcendental meditation on the brain, on cardiovascular system, respiratory system, digestive system, limbic system. We know that something significant is taking place. And what we're doing today is we're going to explore the effects of one particular meditation, transcendental meditation. I want to tell you we're not here, and I'm just saying this right up front, to convince you or sell you on anything. That's not what we're doing here. That's too superficial. We want to reveal, we want to present an enormous body of research that's been done on this technique, and as importantly, how it's being used to impact some very serious, seemingly intractable problems around the world. I'm going to give a quick explanation. Kathleen, I promise this will be quick. We think of the word meditation as a very generic term. We don't really know, it's mindfulness meditation, vipassana meditation, transcendental meditation. What's this? What's that? How are they different? So quickly, because we have a lot to talk about. You're on a little boat, is an analogy. This isn't a meditation. You're on a little boat and you're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And all of a sudden you get these giant 30, 40-foot high waves around you. And you could rightfully think, oh my gosh, the whole ocean is in upheaval. Whole ocean is a bit of an exaggeration. Because if you could do a cross-section of the ocean out there, you'd realize you got these little 30-foot waves, but the ocean in reality is over a mile deep. And while the surface of the ocean can be very turbulent, the depth of the ocean, by its nature, is calm, silent. One time I said it was perfectly silent. A little 12-year-old kid corrected me at a talk. He said, no, there's the fissures down there. There's stuff that happens. So now I just say, kind of quiet. But by nature, the ocean can be turbulent on the surface, and by nature, the ocean can be silent at its depth. And that's the analogy to the mind. Surface of our mind is the gotta, the waves, the gotta mind, the thinking mind. I gotta do this, and I gotta do that, and I gotta call him, and I gotta call her, all that. And every human being has within us a desire, oh, I'd like to have some inner calm, some inner clarity, some inner peace, some inner silence. And the operative word there is inner. And the question is there such a thing as an inner? And if so, how do we get there? So meditation throughout time, we associate the word meditation with equanimity, power, clarity, strength. So according to research, there's 3 basic types of meditation. First is called, that's the second, the first is called focused attention. And focused attention is a technique that involves concentration or control of the mind. I'm doing this quickly. That is, thoughts are seen to be the disruptor of calm, so these are meditations that ask us to clear the mind of thought. It's a cognitive training program. Clear your mind of thought. It's like trying to stop waves on the surface of the ocean. Difficult, arduous, but can be powerful. It creates something called gamma brain waves. Gamma brain waves are 20 to 50 cycles per second, and that shows the brain we're focused intently. And many of these focused attention meditations, the frontal left lobe. Second, open monitoring. Many mindfulness techniques are involved in this. Open monitoring is a technique that says thoughts aren't so bad, but the content of thoughts is a little disruptive. So we learn to dispassionately observe thoughts, feelings. We scan our body for feelings and emotions. We have a thought about Joe, and Joe used to really annoy me, but now I'm just going to, Joe's not going to annoy me. So to be present. And in that presence, we have some equanimity. Open monitoring, mindfulness techniques create something called alpha 1 brainwave pattern, which is in the back of the alpha 2 brainwave pattern that is 10 to 12 cycles per second. Whenever you close your eyes, then what happens is it calms the occipital lobe, so it calms. It also theta brain waves. Theta brain waves are 6 to 8 cycles per second, sort of an onset of dream. And it has some beta waves, which is sort of waking state. Open monitoring, again, is a cognitive process. It's attending to the waves, attending to the thoughts on the surface of the ocean, surface of the mind. And the third is called automatic self-transcending. And that's transcendental meditation. And in that, we hypothesize that there's a vertical dimension to the mind, that we're not just attending to the surface thoughts, but there's a vertical dimension to the mind, and that deep within the mind of every human being, every one of us, there's a level of the mind right now that is already calm and settled and peaceful and alert, like that ocean. It's a hypothesis. The hypothesis is everyone can access that. And transcendental meditation, we learn how to do that. We're going to be talking more about it as the morning goes on. But when we access that calm, and a 10-year-old child with ADD can experience that, just like any one of us who have like type A personalities and I could never clear my mind of thoughts, anyone. And when we have that experience, that's when we have alpha 1. 8 to 10 cycles per second. That's where the mind is settled and reflective and wide awake. There's also a global EEG coherence where the different parts of the brain are connected together in phase. And to transition to that right now, Dr. Fred Travis, who's one of the top neuroscientists and researchers in the world on meditation in the brain, and he's the head of the Center for Brain, Consciousness, and Cognition at Maharishi University of Management. He was going to be here today, but there's a snowstorm in Chicago, as with Dr. Hagelin. So I have a 5-minute video that you're going to see of Dr. Travis talking about some of this, and then we're going to move on. But I really want to thank all of you very much for coming. This is going to be an extraordinary 3 hours, and so if we could watch this video of Dr. Travis.
Here we have Shane Zisman. Let's give him a hand. And what we're going to be seeing is the real-time electrical activity going on in Shane's brain at this very moment. Very good. So this is Shane's brainwaves right now. Now this very front top, that's over the eyes. You can blink 3 times, Shane. 1, 2, 3. Very good. This is a signal coming from the movement of the eyes. It's actually on the outside of the skull, and that's why it's so much higher above the EEG. Now, what we see here is Technicolor, but Shane's brain is not in Technicolor. And here we see a brain laughing here. Let's look at just one signal, and that will help us go more deeply into what is happening inside. So what we have here is, this is from the front of the brain. Now this is a second here, You notice this very fast activity going on. It's going up about 20 times per second. This is the fast activity of the brain processing, thinking, experiencing. We're going to add one other signal. This one is going to be in the back. So this top one is the front, this bottom one is the back. This is what the brain is doing when 700 people are looking at you. This is the back part of the brain. This is vision. The back part of the brain is taking in all of the lights and the colors, deciding what the picture is out there. Then it sends it to the front part of the brain, and the front part of the brain tries to decide what to do with it. Now the point I want you to notice is just how different these two signals are. There's very little similarity between the up and down of this signal and the rising and falling of this signal. Next, we'll see what EEG is like when Shane closes his eyes. So you can close your eyes, Shane. This is very good. Notice, now this is the back. Remember what the back was? That's right, that's vision. Everything that falls on your retina actually streams to the back of the brain and keeps this part of the brain really, really active. All Shane has done is close his eyes. You've cut all that information going to the back of the brain. This is what you see. This is rhythmical alpha activity. It goes up and down 8 to 12 times per second. And this is a signature of the brain which is restful and alert. This part of the brain isn't processing anything. The eyes are closed, but you're awake. You can process, you can think. Notice up here in the front, the EEG is still very fast, it's very active. That's because even though the eyes are closed, this whole mental chatter is still going on, thinking, evaluating, like that. So you can open your eyes again, Shane. What we'll do now is we'll start from eyes open, and then we'll have Shane close his eyes. He'll begin Transcendental Meditation practice. What I want you to do is particularly look in this top lead, the front. We'll begin to see that signature of restful alertness, that alpha activity in the front of the brain. Good, Shane, so you can begin TM practice. So this has been about 16 seconds, but notice here is this rhythmical alpha activity, which before we saw in the back is now seen in the front of the brain. Even though we have only two signals here, this is representative of what's happening over the entire brain. And this restfully alert signal is that signal of transcending. Now we'll take just another minute. We'll continue to watch the EEG of transcending. Notice this, notice the amplitude, notice the amount of this, the density of this activity in the front, also the back. And also follow the signal going up and down. You notice it going up and down here in the front. Notice it's going up and down very similar in the back. This is what coherence is, when the rising and falling of the signal in one part of the brain correlates with the rising and falling of the signal in another part of the brain. This is that mark of total brain functioning, that mark of restful alertness, where there's silence, there's wakefulness, and this becomes the basis for clearer thinking. Very good, Shane. So now you can stop meditating. And then as he opens his eyes, we're seeing the fast activity again of a brain which is actively processing.
Please welcome Candy Crowley. And panelists.
And friends.
Yes.
So it is a packed program, so we want to get right to it. Let me introduce who's just stepped up here. Dr. Norman Rosenthal is a clinical professor of psychiatry at Georgetown University Medical School. He's the internationally renowned psychiatrist and researcher and writer who first described seasonal affect disorder, SAD, and pioneered the use of light therapy and other approaches to prevent and treat it. As a practicing psychiatrist for almost 40 years, Dr. Rosenthal recommends TM to many of his patients and clients. He has written 2 best-selling books about the technique, Transcendence and Supermind, which are pretty much classics in the field at this point. Also joining us, Dr. Suzanne Steinbaum. She's Director of Women's Health Heart at Lenox Hill Hospital in New York City. She is an attending cardiologist. She recently released her book, Dr. Suzanne Steinbaum's Heart Book, Every Woman's Guide to a Heart-Healthy Life. She was the host of Focus on Health. She has been named a New York Times super doctor and a Castle and Conley top doctor for cardiovascular disease. So thank you all both for being here. Let me start with you, Dr. Steinbaum, and just to ask you, so we saw the brain. What happens to the heart, either over time or immediately with Transcendental Meditation?
What's amazing is the true effects that stress and daily life has on the heart. We all know that heart disease, or maybe we don't know, is the #1 killer of all Americans, and actually internationally. And it's due to these multiple risk factors, one of the most profound being high blood pressure. And we know through Transcendental Meditation, we get a reduction in the stress hormones. These are the stress hormones that contract the arteries. These are the stress hormones that increase the heart rate, inflammatory markers, and all of this leads to damage of the lining of the arteries, stiffness of the arteries, high blood pressure, and eventually heart disease. Meditation decreases these hormones, dilates the arteries, decreases the inflammatory markers, and actually in 2013, the American Heart Association wrote a scientific statement that Transcendental Meditation should be the first line of treatment for people with high blood pressure because of the profound effect on the reduction of blood pressure and heart disease.
So, Dr. Rosenthal, watching the brain activity as much as I could on that screen, does it become over time something that is a substitute for medications? I mean, we're talking about first line of defense here with the hearts. Does it substitute? Does it work with? How do you see it? How do you see TM working with medicine?
I think TM is a terrific tool. I've been prescribing medicines now for 40 years for all kinds of things, depression, anxiety, this and that. And so I'm all for medicines when they're needed. But I've also really recognized the limitations of medicines. They don't work for everybody, they don't work completely all the time, and they have side effects. So I have found TM to be a wonderful addition. And then in certain people, I've actually been able to lower dosages and even discontinue medicines. So I think we have to think holistically of the brain and the body and use everything we can. But in the context of that, TM has been one of the most powerful interventions that I've come across, and I'm happy to be able to recommend it.
Everybody loves a story, I think. You know, whenever I watch any of these videos, I love it when someone comes on and says, here's how I was, and here's how I am now, and here's how TM has affected my life. Has TM affected your lives personally?
Absolutely. I think the one thing that we have to think about when it comes to the brain and certainly the heart, we're not separate entities. Our heart and our brain are connected, and how we think and how we feel generates what happens to our hearts. I always talk about, especially in my book and speaking to women, many of us are so heart-centered, meaning how we receive information, how we process, how we feel the stress. We feel it in our hearts, whether it's chest pain or palpitations. And I can tell you that there have been moments, I always talk about sitting in the back seat of a taxi in New York City, when you just feel that. There's nothing better than having TM in your pocket at moments like that. And that's just a very superficial way that it has helped. But it has certainly grounded me in the setting of emergencies, being able to deal with many different issues simultaneously and not being stressed. And I've seen in my patients being able to use TM as a prescription for them really improvement in their outcomes, in terms of their symptoms. I talk about stories. I think of one woman recently who had atrial fibrillation. She was a very young woman, and TM was part of her treatment plan by reducing those stress hormones and decreasing her heart rate and being able to tolerate medications on a very different level.
Dr. Rosenthal?
Yes, I know that for all of us, time is our most precious asset, and that we don't want to allocate time unless it really, really is going to pay off. So my own practice was renewed after 35 years of a lapse by a patient who really urged me to get back to meditating, and I listened. But as he was trying to persuade me, I thought, 20 minutes twice a day, when am I going to find it? How am I going to find it? And the fact is that by persevering, I was able to see that it repays itself many times over. I am less reactive, I am more joyful, I'm more peaceful. I will not miss a meditation if I can possibly help it.
I was giving an introductory talk to a hedge fund guy in New York in his 40s or something, and he was there with his 12-year-old son. And I think his wife had sent him to learn to meditate. And the guy was saying, I did 40 minutes, 20 minutes twice a day. Who has the time? And the little kid, I think he was sort of coached by the mom, said, Dad, there's 1,440 minutes in a day. You don't have 40 minutes, and this is when I knew the mom had said it, for self-care. I knew the mom went a little too far on that. But, he learned it, and just like you, it becomes something that's so valuable for life.
But you all are people of science. I mean, you're trained in, to look at the facts and the figures and all those little things that go up and down. So first, was there not a part of you that went, right, yeah, we're all going to sit around and meditate, and that'll really help? And number two, what particularly, I'm assuming you were impressed by the science, what particularly grabs you now about where we are in the research, and what do you think is the most important, point at this point?
Well, I'm actually by nature a skeptic, since I'm a scientist, and when the TM was reintroduced to me, I remember a friend, Serena Grosswald, some of you will remember her well, lovely woman and wonderful teacher. She was saying, well, other kinds of meditation don't have what Fred Travis can show you on the EEG, and other kinds of meditation. I thought, everybody thinks their kind is the best. But then we started a little program with veterans, with PTSD. And my God, I saw these people getting better under our eyes. It was like amazing. It was like awakenings to see them sort of come to life again. And then I did it myself, and I saw my own responses. I meditated in the Uber coming here today.
Oh.
So, it's a combination, personal experience, clinical observation, and hundreds of peer review articles that really pulled it all together for me and has brought me right here to tell everybody about it.
Dr. Steinman?
When it comes to the heart, we know that 80% of the time heart disease is preventable. And for many, many years, lifestyle intervention was part of really researching how to change outcomes. At one point, there was a trial using yoga to see if there was reduction in cardiovascular disease. So from the perspective of stress management and lifestyle intervention, there's always been a mindful component in prevention. When I really started looking into TM, there was one study that was so significant to me. Over a 5-year period of time using TM, there was a 48 to 60% reduction in heart disease and stroke as part of a preventive strategy. Now, when I give someone an aspirin or a medication for cholesterol, there's a 30% reduction. To have that significant impact through this treatment that can't really harm you or have side effects, it seemed very worth me figuring out. But to be honest with you, it wasn't until I did it myself and saw the profound personal effects, and I am a skeptic too. I thought there's no way that this is going to help. And when I really felt it personally, I became so passionate about being able to provide it for patients because it makes such a huge difference.
Tell them about Spencer, quickly.
I have an 11-year-old who absolutely would not learn to meditate. And in fact, when he went to fill out his form, "Why are you here? My mother made me come," like that. And Bob taught him how to meditate, and the first day he was crawling on the floor as if he just relaxed so much. Monday morning, I was in the kitchen, he was in his bedroom. I get a text message, because that's how we communicate. "Mom, please come in my room." So I go running in thinking something's wrong. And he said, "I just meditated. I feel like I have energy, I can do everything, but I'm calm and focused and leveled. But I can do anything and I'm energized, but I'm really calm." Yeah. And I just looked at him, I said, "This is a PSA for TM. Did Bob tell you to say this to me?" It was unbelievable. And in fact, this morning he texted me, "I did my mantra. I'm so good."
The thing is, well, we have to go on. Yeah. What we want to do now, what we want to do now is we're going to change gears. We've heard the benefits of how it can help any of us, but the David Lynch Foundation was established by the great filmmaker David Lynch almost 13 years ago to bring this simple, evidence-based, non-religious, there's no philosophy, there's no belief system, you can be 100% skeptical, to underserved, under-resourced populations. And these same benefits that we're hearing now are having a huge impact in veterans and children and women and their families who are survivors, as we heard of domestic violence and sexual assault. We're working on in HIV centers. We're working at prisons, juvenile justice, opioid addiction. We're going to focus in on veterans and kids in the next two panels, next two sections. But thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Spencer was great because, you know, as I said, you can just think it's just stupid. You know, he's a 11-year-old kid. He didn't really want to do it, and you just give this little instruction. He said a mantra, which is a word or a sound that has no meaning. It's simple. And when you learn this meditation, you learn it in personal instruction, one-to-one. It's not taught in a group. It's not a mass meditation. It's not a guided meditation. And so there's little 11-year-old Spencer, and I teach him to meditate, and just, phew, he opened his eyes. He said, "I feel so relaxed." Because it's accessing a mechanism. It's a mechanism in the nervous system that we've lost access to that just allows the mind and body to settle down.
I think you're introducing a
I'm
guru,
now
are
going
you not? Let me help you with this.
Yes, you got it. Okay. So what we want to do now is shift gears, and one of the most moving areas of application for the David Lynch Foundation and Operation Warrior Wellness is our work with veterans. There are 21 veterans who take their lives every single day in this country, and 70% of them are from the Vietnam era, which means that trauma doesn't get healed by time. And we're very fortunate, and if there's a chance for you to talk with them afterwards, Scott Gould is here, who was the #2 guy at the Veterans Administration for many years, and he's working very focused with others, Dr. Stuart Rothenberg and others, to bring this to veterans in the U.S. So if we could watch this video, and then we'll continue with our program.
Here we are once again, Specialist Villa from Italy, Chicago. So let us give you a little 1-2 on the situation here. That road down there is the one where we got blown up twice so far. We're trying to observe for any enemy activity.
Back in the day, I used to be known as the Sasquatch from Hell or the Coke Machine. My first summer in Iraq in 2008, that's when I experienced the incident that basically caused most of my stress for the next 6 years. What I started telling myself immediately was that I cannot let this happen again. nothing is going to happen to my brothers again, not on my watch. And for the next 6 years, I wasn't able to sleep for more than, say, 2-3 hours a night. And I would wake up angry. I remember the worst part of it was waking up angry. Nobody tells you what it's going to be like when you get out. I would go mostly into self-destructive rages. There have been times where I thought I was going to become the next Tim McVeigh. Nothing worked. I mean, psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers. I had 3-4 appointments a week for 2 years, and that didn't do anything for me. Nothing. I tried taking their medications, 13 of them, and that didn't work. They basically turned me into a zombie. I mean, I was nowhere to be found, even when I was awake. The first time I did the Transcendental Meditation session, it was the first time I felt like a rock had just been lifted off of me. And then a week of meditating just changed my life like that. I kind of struggled to stay awake the next couple of weeks because I had finally gotten my sleep back. I mean, I had basically been sleep deprived for 6 years. I was able to get my peace of mind back, and it gave me, immediate sense of relief, purpose, and it's hard to find something like that. My brothers noticed that I'm a lot more calm. I tell all of them that I meditate, and I told them how much it's done for me. I would list the benefits that I've had from it, and then I would tell them it's just an opportunity to learn how to reboot your system, basically. Just like they trained you to be a killer, they should give you a set of tools that you'll need when you get back out. My greatest hope was to be able to find the peace that I do now, not just for myself, but also for my friends and family. Now, thanks to, the meditation, I have normal problems, like dieting, exercising, not smoking, and that's about it, really. Those are my only concerns in life right now. Well, with Transcendental Meditations, my life just changed instantly, for the better.
I will tell you something. You should go, and we will give you the exact site. I'll let Bobby do that. To the website for the David Lynch Foundation and listen to some more of these vet stories, because they're just, if they don't move you, nothing on this earth will, because they have some real stories to tell. Let me introduce our panelists here that came up. This is Dr. John Rigg. He is the founder and program director of the TBI Clinic at the Eisenhower Army Medical Center, where he practices medicine, teaches, conducts research, and manages the day-to-day operation of the TBI Clinic. Dr. Rigg graduated from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, completed his residency in physical medicine and rehabilitation at the Kessler Institute, University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey, and he got his fellowship in traumatic brain injury, TBI, at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. Sanford Niddick, who is the director of the Center for Social Emotional Health. He's the principal investigator of the $2.4 million grant funded by the Department of Defense on the effects of Transcendental Meditation on post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, sorry.
No, keep going.
Compared to he's comparing that to the gold standard prolonged exposure psychotherapy conducted at the San Diego VA. So welcome, both of you. What?
I want to add something to his.
Yes.
His center is at Maharishi University of Management, an extraordinary university where meditation and transcendental meditation and consciousness is at the core of the curriculum, and a lot of what's going on here at American University and many universities around the country towards helping students develop themselves through yoga, meditation, started there. So we're very fortunate to have Dr. Niddick here as well.
So let me start there because of the research that you've been watching and participating in, and tell me what you found. What is the research showing?
Well, first of all, we took 203 veterans who had similar histories to the gentleman on the video. And we randomized them to one of three groups: Transcendental Meditation, Prolonged Exposure, which is the gold standard psychotherapy, being used across the VA system and to a health education PTSD active control group. So people had a 1/3 chance of being taught transcendental meditation, etc. So over 3 months, we studied these veterans with documented PTSD, and we found that transcendental meditation was indeed very effective in reducing trauma symptom severity, significant reductions in clinically significant symptoms of trauma, and significant reductions in comorbid depressive conditions. Transcendental meditation, we wanted to compare TM to the best psychotherapy. And what we found is that TM was at least comparable to prolonged exposure, and on multiple post-testing on self-report PTSD variable and depression, the TM was actually superior to prolonged exposure, both in rate or trend of change and also in average reduction across multiple testing situations over the 3 months. And there are 2 things I think that really stand out from the research. One is most people in the area of treating PTSD would think that you can only administer either standard medication for PTSD, which actually target symptoms, or administer psychotherapy such as prolonged exposure, and there's only 2 or 3 VA-approved psychotherapies right now in the VA system, that you need to focus directly on the trauma symptoms. You have to, in the case of prolonged exposure, repeatedly have the patient recount their trauma experience, live it, get into the situation of the triggers that enliven the PTSD, and systematically desensitize them to the trauma experience in the TRIM. Very few people thought that, even with the preliminary research on TM, that a non-trauma focused program, and I think it was described very well in the videos and what we heard as the introductions, that is the Transcendental Meditation program that was administered. The TM teachers don't talk about the trauma experiences. The patients talk about their improved well-being. They don't talk about the specific triggers. They don't even want to think about them. So that was the first thing, that a non-trauma focused therapy like Transcendental Meditation can be as effective and in some situations even more effective. Secondly, and this was something that we didn't expect, within the very first month of practice, unlike the psychotherapies, we saw dramatic reductions with Transcendental Meditation. So those 2 points. It was immediate. We had people recounting their experiences, this was anecdotally, about how they experienced a peacefulness that they didn't know that they had anymore within even the first day of instruction and over the first month.
So Dr. Rigg, why don't you tell me a story? You know, you're always going to get that from a journalist, right? Because I know on day in and day out, you're seeing these vets, you're seeing the effect that TM has on them. Tell us about that.
On a day-to-day basis, what they will often present to me is a dramatic change in the way they feel towards their whole lives. You know, like, so I'll kind of introduce what I do. So I'm a TBI doctor. I'm a brain mechanic. Okay, I'm not a behavioral health, traumatic brain injury, and I'm not a behavioral health psychiatrist. I'm getting patients who come in who have sustained concussions, typically multiple concussions. They come in with headaches, memory, sleep, and mood issues, and oftentimes their concussions, you know, we may have had one in 1999, 2001, 2004, 2007, spread apart. And we expect a concussion to recover. We don't really know what's going on a microscopic level in the brain with concussions and recovery. But oftentimes, what we've discovered in my population, military population, is that repeated concussions spread apart by years may not be triggering the sustained headaches, memory, sleep, and mood issues. It's often the post-traumatic stress issues that's promoting and maintaining the symptoms of concussion. So we hear a lot about concussions in the news, in the NFL, in soldiers and stuff. But if you have, concussions heal 3 to 4 months, maybe at the most, okay? Now, there can be sustained symptoms in some patients, but they'll typically resolve. So why are people having all these symptoms years later? Well, it's because they got their concussion in a traumatic situation. So that's what's keeping it alive. They didn't ride their bicycle on a Sunday afternoon, fall down, hit their head on a rock in a park. They had sustained a concussion in a traumatic event when somebody tried to take their life, an IED blast, and maybe their guy sitting next to them got blown into bits, or a suicide bomber, and they got the blood of the suicide bomber. So traumatic situations. And it's the trauma that's maintaining the stress that's causing this proliferation of the symptoms. So if we're looking at that, we say, well, let's reduce the stress. Okay, so we teach exercise and stuff, and the TM is a stress reducer. I don't have to talk about that anymore after we've heard great words said about that. And so what they're reporting then is a reduction in the headaches because the muscle tension is gone. They're able to sleep better, as the testimonial right before we started talking exhibited. Their mood is better. The irritability, anxiety has gone down. And their memories are improving because it's not that what's happening with the memory is they're not having brain problems, because of trauma. They're focused, they're sitting in a restaurant with their spouse, back to the wall, and they're looking at the whole restaurant, not engaging in conversation. So their spouse could be telling them things. They're not hearing what the spouse is saying because they're inspecting everybody coming in and out. And then the next day, the spouse will say, "Hey, ready to go?" And they go, "Where are we going?" I don't remember that. "Oh, you have selective hearing, you're not listening." No, the fact is they were running security the whole while they were in there. I tell them, I said, you got to tell your spouse, just, "Hey, maybe I don't remember that, but nobody put a bullet in your head or a dagger in your back because I was watching you, have fun with it." But that's the truth. They're not like purposely missing conversations. They're distracted by this constant hyperactivation. And that's what the result is that we get this symptomatic improvement in all the symptoms because the stress is reduced. That's driving them.
So I'm trying to imagine these tough men and women who have been through quite a bit, who have, TBIs are as traumatic as it gets in a traumatic situation. I'm trying to picture you going in saying, "I think you ought to try meditation." And then what is the look on their face at that point?
Well, it's not quite introduced that suddenly. we got to plan this out a little bit. And I'm glad to say right now is that a lot of the new students interested in TM hear about it from their peers. Okay, we've been doing it for a few years, so there is a not substantial, but there's a bunch of soldiers that are practicing this, and they tell their buddies that that's the way they've achieved resolution, maybe not total resolution, but certainly great relief from the symptoms. And so we get people now coming to us asking to do meditation. When I introduce myself as a brain mechanic, I tell them, here's ways we can fix the brain, and I'll explain the different circuitry, the hyperarousal that occurred because you're exposed to the blood and guts of war. What happens is you get this activation of your primitive reflexive system. It doesn't understand geography. It works great in Iraq and Afghanistan. The faster you're reacting to situations, the more likely you are to survive. But that mechanism doesn't understand geography. So when they come back home, they can't shut it off by thinking about it any more than they could lower their blood pressure or their heart rates, cardiovascular symptoms that one of our colleagues spoke about earlier. You can't think about, I'm going to lower my blood pressure. No, but you can take actions to lower that down. TM is one of them. But it's recognizing that that system is on. So we offer it to them as a way of controlling that neural pathway. Medications, one other thing I'll tell them about, medications can be successful. It's a general treatment. You take a pill, it hits your digestive tract, gets absorbed into the blood takes it to every cell in your entire body. The beautiful thing about the meditation technique is it's a focal treatment of specific neurological pathways that we want to target. We don't want to target the whole brain, A medication can have side effects. TM doesn't have negative side effects because we're really focusing on certain deactivation of the limbic systems and these activated, hyperarousal pathways that then results in the lowering of the stress, the lower of the hyperarousal, and relief of the symptoms that are triggered by the stress factors. What I call it the autonomic dysregulation. You know, the TBI becomes autonomic dysregulation.
Yeah.
Got that too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Handy coined it long before you did.
I thought I heard it somewhere.
Look it up.
Thanks for that, Candy.
Dr. Nitish, tell me, you've got these results from this comparative study that you've been doing. What are the implications, the one funded by the Defense Department, what are the implications for, moving forward now?
Well, the implications are actually quite large. The Department of Defense and other agencies and groups review treatments periodically and assign a status of evidence-based treatments that can be approved and implemented in VA and military settings. So with this research and other research, there's a smaller study that just was concluded, another randomized controlled study at Northwell Healthcare System in Long Island, that study also found similar results in randomized controlled trials. These trials will put a lot of emphasis, pressure may not be the right word, so I didn't quite use that word, on people seeing that non-trauma focused therapies are effective and hopefully lead to recommendation for use in VA and military settings. So it's really...
Which would be huge.
It would be huge. The Department of Defense has made it very clear on a number of occasions that when they fund research for policy implications. NIH, and I've been involved in most of the cardiovascular studies, they're not opposed to changing policies, as we heard before. TM was recommended by the American Heart Association for blood pressure reduction. But they can fund basic research that's interesting and important. The Department of Defense, especially now, the Psychological Health Division, they're funding research to look at the results to affect policy decisions. So it's quite huge.
Yeah, it's major.
And I think one of the most important things here, and we're going to hear about it now, is in the area of military education. So we send these young men and women off to harm's way, and they come back with post-traumatic stress or TBI, and Transcendental Meditation is a huge help. But what can we do to equip these young people, courageous young people, so when they go out, they're more resilient, and if something happens, they heal much faster. And so the next section is going to be talking about the use of this technique on a widespread basis at Norwich University, which is the oldest private military college in the country, up in Northfield, Vermont, and also at National Defense University right here in Washington, D.C. So thank you both very, very much. Really great. And if you have
Thank you. So I'll introduce the next panel as they're coming up here. Major General retired Stephen Rippey is Special Advisor for the David Lynch Foundation Center for Excellence in Military Health. He has also served as a trustee of the Norwich University Governing Board since 2006. He serves as a special advisor to the David Lynch Foundation Center for Excellence in Military Health, which I actually just said. He has also served as the president and CEO of the Army Distaff Foundation, ADF, and Knollwood, a military continuing care retirement community. And as we say in the news business, I buried the lead. You military service for 29 years. Also joining us at the podium today, here on the podium, Hassan Teta. Dr. Teta is an associate professor of surgery at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences, adjunct faculty at Howard University College of Medicine. He has served as the division lead for Futures and Innovation at Navy Medicine's headquarters, Bureau of Medicine and Surgery. I did not do enough in my life. And I read, holy cow.
That was weekends.
His clinical work includes cardiovascular disease management, heart failure surgery, and heart and lung transplantation. Also with us is Tony Spinoza, who is the Director of Health Fitness. He is responsible for the development of programs relative to the educational, motivational, physiological, psychological, and spiritual dimensions of a comprehensive program of health and fitness for all members of the National Defense University. Tony is a career Army officer, spending 20 years on active duty and holding various staff and command positions worldwide. We don't have time for you all to talk now that I've introduced everything you're doing.
Thank you all very much
Thank
for
you
coming.
so much. We can all say you're quite accomplished. Listen, General Rippey, why don't you tell us a little bit about Norwich?
Yeah, as Bob said, our nation's oldest military university, Northfield, Vermont, 10 miles south of the capital of Montpelier, 2,200 men and women. It's formed much like Texas A&M. It's got a corps of cadets, men and women of about 1,600, and then a civilian component. A very forward-thinking president, Rich Schneider, two-star Rear Admiral in the Coast Guard Reserves, has been president for 23 years. So 8 years ago, Rich wondered if TM could be a tool to enable men and women to learn how to deal with stress before they get in stressful situations. So he contacted Bobby, and they put a wonderful man who is literally the father and mentor for thousands of men and women, named Dave Zobek at Norwich. Started out 7 years ago with, it's very stressful being a freshman at Norwich. It's a military university. A platoon that was trained in TM, and then a control platoon. And they matched the control platoon as close as they could to the platoon that was trained, you know, race, gender, college board scores, all that stuff. And just like we talked about the initial panel, the medical science, literally within 90 days in every measurable functional area, the platoon that had been trained in Transcendental Meditation, meditating 20 minutes twice a day, was outperforming the control platoon. So that's how it started at Norwich. Since then, Norwich has trained 865 men and women in 50 of staff in Transcendental Meditation. So he started with 30 trained, and today on campus at that university, there are 412 students that are trained in TM. I'll give you one quick little vignette. I'm at a board meeting last January. We have a board member who is a very fit 50-year-old woman, single mom, president of a university. And she comes up to me and says, "Hey, Steve, I heard you've been meditating for a long time." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "I started 90 days ago, and for the first time in 3 years, I'm sleeping through the night without medication, and my blood pressure is normalized." So I say, "Hey, you want to meditate with some students at the next board meeting?" We go there, we meditate with 38 students. I'm next to this young man who's a junior. He's in his PT gear, and I see him the next night at the dinner. He's been selected to be the regimental commander. Tim Weinhold's his name. He's a regimental commander this year. And I said, "Tim, what an honor for you to be selected to lead the men and women at Norwich. This is going to change your life, and it's also going to change the lives of all the men and women that you're going to lead." And I said, "Oh, by the way, it was great meditating with you yesterday." And he said, "Sir," he said, "at the beginning of this year," now he's a junior, he's 21 years old, he said, "my life was out of control." He said, I felt myself under an enormous amount of stress. I would have inability to study. I just wasn't clear thinking. And I knew about Dave, and I knew that we were training people in TM. And I went and sought Dave out, and he moved me to the top of the list, and he trained me. In his words, "This has transformed my life." That's from a 21-year-old young man. And so I'm really proud of what Norwich has done, enabling all these men and women to learn this technique so that they can deal with stress as they start out, which is going to be very stressful lives and careers.
Video?
Let's show the video, please.
And light? Sound good.
Norwich is a crucible of an institution. We're the oldest private military college in the country. And not only is it academic, it's like adding boot camp and military service on top of a very rigorous academic program. So a lot of stress. Our students are dealing with a lot of stress.
Going from high school to college
at any school is going to be a stressful situation. You're trying to learn how to time manage and what study techniques work the best for you.
Each day seems shorter than the last. You got formations, you got to wear a certain uniform, people are yelling at you, and by the way, you have your homework.
We're seeing a generation of students coming to college who are less able to adapt and improvise and overcome adversity.
We know that students are more anxious. They're coming with more concerns and in some cases with less preparation.
They're looking for some way to handle the stress.
One day I had a wonderful call from the daughter of one of my trustees who said, Rich, you need to find out what the David Lynch Foundation is doing about TM. And I said, what's TM? And she said, Transcendental Meditation. I said, really? So she sent me some articles, and I was reluctant, skeptical, but the more I learned, the more confident I became. We had our first session, and we decided we were going to try this. So we wrote to all the inbound rooks and their parents and said, we're going to do a trial, training for 30 and not training for the other 30. We put them in 2 separate platoons, and the reaction was dramatic.
I've seen it, improve my ability in wrestling. I've seen it improve my grades. I've seen it just make me more clear, more focused.
TM's just been the greatest tool that I've had for stress management and keeping clarity in my life. I used to feel very overwhelmed throughout the day. When I started TM, I started feeling more refreshed and more focused.
I think within 4 or 5 weeks, the kids who didn't get the training were complaining. Like the other guys had an advantage of them in class, and the other platoon wasn't getting yelled at as much, and they learned how to do things so much quicker, and they were so far ahead of the other platoons in what they were learning from a military point of view.
In about 1,200 hours flying helicopters when I was a youngster, this is before we had an aviation branch, a lot of stressful situations over the course of those years, and I wish I would have had the Transcendental Meditation tool then.
TM is all about being relaxed and being a better thinker. And it doesn't require any drugs. You can do it at any time. You can be anywhere.
It's just part of a overall healthy lifestyle. I mean, you become physically fit, you work out, you take care of your body. You do Transcendental Meditation, it helps you take care of your mind. The powerful part of that is that it actually physiologically improves your brain function.
If I'm feeling cluttered and crowded with all of the different responsibilities I have, I do TM and suddenly, I know what I gotta do.
When I get a lot of things going on at once, I'll sit there for a while and I'll just think, oh my gosh, I have so much to do. I don't know where I'm gonna start. After I learned TM, I found myself in that situation, so I figured, okay, I'm gonna take 20 minutes, I'm gonna meditate, and after the 20 minutes, I felt like I was really able to concentrate on getting my work done and not just sitting there overwhelmed about it.
Some of our psych professors did some scholarly research about the impact it has on your neurons and the connectivity there, and your eye retinal tracking, which is very important to military people. Are we tracking the right target? And how does being settled and being more situationally aware improve that? And it does.
I think it was within 90 days that in every measurable functional area, the platoon that was trained in TM was outperforming the control platoon.
We found a significant difference. Things like depression, anxiety, stress, bad moods, all of that went down significantly. We also found that constructive thinking, behavioral coping, emotional coping, and resilience all went up significantly.
People here want to do stuff that works, and people see that TM is a tool that's making people more successful. So, it's just part of the culture here.
I think the fact that we can empower young men and women with a tool to enable them to handle stress before they get into stressful situations, I think it's a huge gift we give them as part of their overall education and becoming a man and a woman in our society.
Hassan, I want to, Dr. Teta, I want to bring you in on this because I so well remember one of the first conversations I ever had with you, and we talked about the downside. Like, what are the risks here for TM? Because we, here, like hallelujah. We should all run out and, teach TM. Well, we can't, but teachers should teach TM to anyone that, that's on the street. So what are the downsides? What are the risks here?
Thanks, Candy. I think one of the things I should do before answering that question is give a little background. Many of my colleagues that have been up on the panel, and certainly those you've seen on video, have voiced this concern of skepticism, of a little bit of a dubious thought about this meditation. I came to learn about meditation sort of quite by accident. I happened to attend a sort of an informational session that was talking about meditation. And then, didn't think much about it as a physician, as a scientist, sort of thought, well, medication, surgery works much better than all of that. And then I got deployed. I was deployed to Afghanistan. And I went as a combat trauma surgeon with the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Forces. And there's nothing like deployment that will humble one, particularly when you're dealing with young men and women that have been blown up to pieces and you're operating on them in a tent under austere conditions. And even being from Brooklyn, that didn't shield me from feeling this sense of humility and helplessness, not to mention stress and other things. So if our perspective was a little different from the medical standpoint, besides prayer and my individual colleagues that were there to support me, one of the things that I did is retreat to reading and trying to get my mind wrapped around things. And one of my favorite books was Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And it was in that moment in the desert, reading this classic work from a truly great military leader, that I realized when I got back home that I was going to really learn about meditation and see how it could potentially help me, because I thought to myself, well, there's probably something to this. And in my former job, and this is what prompted my question to you, in the capacity of being one that pitches ideas, particularly to senior leaders, admirals, and the leadership in Navy medicine in particular, in my job of innovation and futures, I was tasked with bringing great ideas to very powerful people that had influence. And in that role, you'll quickly find that it's very easy to become discouraged, because almost immediately, and in most military settings and great organizations, we're risk averse. We ask immediately, what's the bad thing about this? Well, this is a great idea. Artificial intelligence sounds great, but what could go wrong? This new weapon system is great, but what could go wrong? And in thinking about that, I asked that question of you because I brought Transcendental Meditation as a tool, as a resource, as something that I saw a positive benefit in my own personal life that could potentially help our servicemen and women. And I wanted to know what answer I could provide when that question would be posed to me. What could go wrong? And so I asked many people. I asked you, I asked Bob, I've asked my instructors, and people gave me different answers. And I could see the audience is on the edge of the seat, like, what can go wrong? It turns out not much. My colleague talked about the side effects of medications that we prescribe. I will tell you that the side effects of our pills and some of our therapies, and even I'm guilty of it, our surgeries, are far worse than the side effects, if any, of Transcendental Meditation. So what could go wrong is, I guess you could potentially become calmer. And in doing so, you might have better relationships with people. And
that's great.
That may not necessarily be what your intention is. So succinctly, not much.
Holy Friend, I really have literally thought about that question for so long, and I couldn't come up with anything either. So
actually, there's never been, in the 400 studies that have peer-reviewed studies published on Transcendental Meditation and published in top referee journals, there's never been any negative, harmful side effect detected. And it's just because basically you can summarize this as the Transcendental Meditation gives the body profound rest in a natural way. There's no manipulation, there's no suggestion, there's nothing unnatural. It's just accessing a mechanism that allows your mind and body to settle down, and an 11-year-old Spencer can do it, and who didn't even want to. And in that deep rest, the body heals itself naturally, so there is no harmful side effects.
Tony, talk to me about the National Defense University and what TM has brought to NDU.
Okay, well, we have to fast forward about 20 years from Norwich now. We have my students at NDU, like Hassan, are anywhere from late 30s to late 50s. So we have heart disease as a risk factor. We have all the metabolic syndromes as a risk factor. And we talk about the prevention, and we talk about all the things that are out there that everyone knows about. We talk about medication. We talk about exercise and diet. But there's always that one thing that's always missing, and that's that intangible we can't measure. Now, we can measure how far your cholesterol goes down by taking a little pill. We measure how far your blood pressure goes down by taking a little pill. What we can't measure is what's inside you, that spiritual fitness, as I call it, something that makes you special, that makes you succeed in whatever you're doing in life. So in our students, we have students who are very, very successful. They're very stressed out. They've come from jobs with that at the highest part of their career to this point. So how do we help them become better? How do we help them improve their human performance? Now I can help them with their push-ups and their pull-ups and all that stuff. That's very tangible. But what I can't help them with, what we're trying now with TM is that spiritual fitness, is what it does to them. You know, a lot of the anecdotal information that I get from, we've trained 88 people so far, all right, over August and September. It was amazing to me when Hassan and I talked about bringing a meditation program, and I tried different forms. I tried iRest, I tried mindfulness. For me, I'm just a simple football coach. It was too hard for me. But as soon as I got into TM, it was easy. Right away, it was I had a great instructor in Bob, but it right away took me down to a level I've never been. So I said, wow, this is good stuff. I think we really need to talk about with the students. So when we talked about how do we implement the program for these guys, and these people, like I said, majority of them have master's degrees, PhDs. They're very well educated, very successful in what they do, whether it be military, civilian, State Department. It doesn't matter. People that come here, about 600 students that we have. Some are international fellows from about 70 different countries. So we have a great clientele that we pick from and we choose from when they come here. So what happens is that when I put out the word for TM, I'm saying 30 to 40 people. Hassan's saying a little more. We ended up on that first day getting over 60 people show up. And that's just the people we let in the room. The other people had to go away. I said, wow, this is much. I'm only equipped to train for 30 people. But yeah, we have 60-some people already here. So with that, it was definitely a need for these senior executives that to have something other than diet and exercise as part of their fitness regime. So what we did is that we ended up, through the good graces of David Lynch, had some great instructors come down to teach my 88 people right now. And from what I've heard from the people who've taken it, it's changed their lives. It's changed the way they study. It's changed the way they've done things overall. So for us as students in the National Defense University, it's changed them. And I always tell people I run a pyramid scheme. I really do. So if I train so many people, all right, they go out and they train people and they get that same concept out to their subordinates and peers, it just filters on down. So my thing is I just run a big pyramid scheme, and right now TM is working very, very well for us in that scheme. So.
Let me, the time police, sort of pressing me, but I wanted to get a quick answer from each of you, starting with you, Tony, and down the line. Where do you see in your own bailiwicks at the moment TM going from here in the future?
Nothing but up. I think more and more people will want to do it. I think the word of mouth is out there amongst the students, and that word of mouth will, not just with the students here, but the students that come next year.
Dr. Teta?
I think one of the key messages I would communicate or convey is that TM should not be looked at, particularly with our community in the military, of something to treat just PTSD and deal with that. Yes, it can do that. But what it does I would argue, is it makes you a better person. Makes you a better person. Tony is to my left here. I will tell him this story. It may embarrass him, but very quickly it illustrates the point. So after Tony learned TM, I had the opportunity, very serendipitously, to ask his wife, who was standing right next to him, hey, have you noticed a difference in Tony since he's learned TM? He had been into it about 90 days or so. And it was a surprise question. He wasn't expecting it. I wasn't really expecting to ask it, but I saw an opportunity. And of course, she was surprised, and she simply said, yeah, he doesn't get stressed out in traffic anymore. So we live in D.C. You all know the traffic can be quite profound. And for her to say that he's very calm in traffic, I think speaks volumes. If there's a pill that can do that, let me know. So to answer your question, I see it making people better versions of themselves.
Final word?
I think our goal is to make Transcendental Meditation a tool available to all active duty military, their families, and veterans, and that's what Bobby and I and Fred and others want to achieve here over the next short period of time.
And I would just like to make one comment again. So those of you who are watching this at home or here, again, we're taking these 3 hours to really present to you, because you're all busy people, this is what this technique can do. We're not trying to push something on you, but this is a precious opportunity for you to gather information and then see how it can fit, or it could fit, in your work or in your life. The other thing I want to say is, sometimes people say, well, you know, I do mindfulness, so I don't need to do that, or I do this and I don't need to do that. We don't need to silo. It's a big life. There are many tools in the toolbox. We look at what works. If there's research to show that it works, we try it. And if it resonates with us, if it works with us, then that's something we can incorporate in our lives. So we do know this is a lot that you're hearing. We're going to break after we hear an amazing presentation on education. We're going to take a break and then come back with a little bit more. But I just want to make that point, that we're very grateful to American University, very grateful to the Abramsons for providing this forum for us to share with you some pretty extraordinary information. And the last thing I want to say is, it could sound too much. Oh, TM did this, and TM did that, and TM... What is it really? We're just accessing a mechanism that every human being has anyway. We're hardwired for this. This technique just acts. That's why an 11-year-old kid can do it, or any of us can do it. Why a skeptic, anybody can do it. And you add it to the other things you do in your life. So I just wanted to make those points, and really very grateful to these 3 amazing leaders for the work that you're doing to train the next generation of military leaders. And by the way, Transcendental Meditation has its roots in the warrior classes of ancient times. This was practiced by warriors. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks, Bobby.
We go off stage?
No, I'm going to transition and then we go off stage. So we're going to have one more really extraordinary section here on the work with children. When the David Lynch Foundation was started back in 2005, its first purpose was to bring this to any child anywhere in the country or in the world who wanted to learn to meditate. And you're going to hear some amazing stories. So we're going to step off, and Candy is going to introduce our next speaker, and everything speaks for itself. But thank you all. Again, our speakers in military, and Dr. Rosenthal and Dr. Steinbaum. This has been so far pretty extraordinary, so thank you very much. Don't go anywhere.
There you are, okay. I want to introduce to all of you John Wolf, who is the Associate Director of Implementation and Scale Up, University of Chicago Crime Lab and Education Lab. Since 2012, John has worked on evaluating innovative approaches for reducing crime and increasing educational outcomes for underserved students. He is currently working on a large-scale, randomized, controlled trial that delivers TM to high school students in some of Chicago's most distressed communities. I can't wait to hear this, John Wolf.
Thank you so much. And am I missing a clicker that I thought was going to be up here so I can throw the slides on? In the meantime, just to start, we are an evaluation partner doing some really exciting work with the David Lynch Foundation. Several of those people are in the room with us today. So if you have time and want to learn more, talk to me or some of the David Lynch staff during the break. They can tell you all about the on-the-ground work that's going on in Chicago. Now, two of the biggest challenges facing not just Chicago, but really every major urban center across the country are reducing violence, especially among young people, and improving educational outcomes for those same young people. Now, this isn't an issue that is unique to Chicago, but recently, some of you may be familiar with it, there was heightened attention brought to the issue of violence around our city. This is a graph that shows the number of homicide victims in Chicago going back from 2010 and then up until last year in 2016. If you go back even farther, the number of homicides in Chicago had been relatively stable, somewhere in the low to mid 400s for about 10 years. And then something dramatic happened in 2016 where that number jumped from 485 to 764 individuals. Now, that is a shocking number, but it's also, I think, pressing to remember that these are people, these are sons, these are brothers, these are husbands, and this was an increase of 279 additional homicide victims in 1 year, which is equivalent to almost the total number of homicide victims in New York City. And New York City is about 3 times the size of the city of Chicago, and you see that their total number was equal to the additional number of people that were murdered in Chicago in 2016. Now we're most of the way through 2017. There might be some reprieve from that, but the number remains much higher than it had been previously. Unfortunately, this is not, like I mentioned, something that is confined solely to Chicago. This shows the gun homicide rates for males ages 15 to 24 in the United States across 3 different demographic populations, as opposed to an index of 17 other high-income countries. So think of the UK, Canada, Germany. You see in those other high-income countries, the number is about 0.4 per 100,000 individuals. Again, this is males ages 15 to 24. For white males in the United States, that number is almost 13. For Latino males in the United States, that number is 15. And for young black males in the United States, that number is over 53. These numbers are also not affecting people equally across cities or across locations. Here's a look at Chicago. I'll be showing you a little later where we're doing work in the city. On the left side, you see the poverty rates in Chicago, and on the right side, you see the violent crime rates in Chicago. The darker the color, the more concentrated, the higher rates in each scenario. Unfortunately, this is not unique to Chicago. If you look at New York, where we're starting some work with the Quiet Time program, the trend continues. And you look at Washington, D.C., again, those pockets, those concentrated pockets of crime and poverty are hyper-localized in the most disadvantaged neighborhoods, which mean students who are growing up in these neighborhoods are exposed to extreme high levels of stress, of trauma, of violence. And so what I want to talk to you this morning is about maybe one potential solution for helping kids deal with this overwhelming avalanche of stressful situations that they're presented with. You might draw a conclusion that being impacted by all of this stressful situation over and over and over again would have a negative impact on your ability to function in all sorts of areas. And new research in psychology points to something that they're calling cognitive bandwidth. Cognitive bandwidth refers to your ability to process information and make good decisions. And what we're learning is that when people are faced with extremely stressful situations, their ability to make really effective decisions is narrowed because their efforts, their mental efforts have to be focused on those stressful situations, that they aren't able to utilize their full cognitive bandwidth, and it actually is reduced in certain settings. There's a affiliate of the Crime Lab at the New York University, Patrick Sharkey, who's looked at this specifically with school-age children, and he found that simply by living in an area where violence occurs, so if you're in a neighborhood where there is violence, where homicides occur, students in those neighborhoods are functioning at a lower level, which is equivalent to about, he puts it in the ballpark of about 1 week out of every month, you are functioning at a reduced capacity because of those traumas that you are dealing with. One young person in the study that we're doing in Chicago put it very eloquently where he said, "There's no quiet where we live. There's nothing but noise and drama." Now, we all know what it's like to feel stressful. Someone earlier mentioned the experience of sitting in traffic. Maybe you're running late for a meeting, or maybe you're talking in front of people with cameras pointed at you with bright lights, and so your heart beats a little faster, your palm gets a little sweaty, your voice gets a little more high-pitched, so we know what stress is like. Fortunately, for a lot of people, you're able to get away from that stress, whether that is exercise or you go home and have a glass of wine with your family after a long day at work, or you're able to tap into something like TM. A lot of us have an escape from that stress. Unfortunately for the young people in Chicago, far too many of them are living with this traumatic stress day in and day out, and with no release from that, are forced to function under that reduced bandwidth. So how can we help? We are a research university. We don't come up with ideas. We don't try to think of the best things to do in a lab, but we go out and crowdsource ideas from people already doing the work on the ground. So 2 years ago, we held what we call design competition, where we ask practitioners in the field for their best ideas. What are you doing on the ground that maybe people don't know about that others should, so we can grow what you're doing? So first, we try to find innovative ideas, and then we test them. In an era where there are very scarce resources in the public sector, we don't have a lot to spend on public education, which means every single dollar that we do spend, we need to make sure we're allocating to those interventions that can do the most social good for every dollar that we're spending. So we rigorously test those ideas, and when we find something that works, we work with policymakers to bring that to more individuals so that we can share those benefits. The winner of the design competition that we held most recently was the Quiet Time competition, which I will share the skeptical feeling with previous panelists. We were presented with over 230 ideas from around the country, and when one of the finalists was the Quiet Time program, we kind of looked at each other and said, I don't know if you can get 15, 16, and 17-year-olds to be completely silent and meditate twice a day, but let's give it a shot. So we rolled out the program first as a pilot phase in Chicago, and then last year in 3 regular Chicago public high schools. The Quiet Time program is built into the school day as a regularly scheduled part of their experience in high school. You simply remove a couple minutes from every period and then allocate that time to Quiet Time. So you can see this is actually a high school that's delivering the program this year. After second period, they do not leave their second period classrooms, but they practice TM for 15 minutes, and then when the bell rings, they go throughout their day, and then again at the end of the 7th period before they go home. The idea is actually very simple. Students who are put under an incredible amount of stress have this fight or flight response that's constantly firing in their brain, and what happens is that with this pressure, with this overexposure to trauma, the brain never has a chance to reset. And as that fight or flight response is constantly firing, it actually narrows the bandwidth of the individual, which can lead to a whole host of negative outcomes. And we hypothesize that having TM as part of your day, both to start your day and then to end your day before you have to go back out in your community to whatever you have to do, acts as a reset where it interrupts that firing of the flight or fight response and gives students that time to unwind, to settle, and combat that chronic issue. One student that we talked to last year summed up the hypothesis, and almost the same as the story with Spencer. We did not plant this question or did not plant this response, but when asked him about his experience, he said, you know, I used to always get angry, but now since I'm doing TM, I just kind of brush it off. That's great anecdotally. We love to hear those stories, but we want to know what is the empirical impact of the program. Unfortunately, it's ongoing. We were in 3 high schools last year. There's an additional 3 high schools this year, so we're working in total with about 2,400 students across those schools. In each school, we have divided the population up into a treatment and control group. What that means is simply if you're in a second period classroom, that classroom is randomized to either be a treatment group, which is offered the chance to participate in Transcendental Meditation, or a control group, which the teacher is given 15 minutes to do any other quiet activity that they choose. Some are doing silent sustained reading, some are just letting students work on homework, some just turn the lights off and let students kind of relax in whatever way they want. And so what we're trying to figure out, is there a causal impact of delivering the meditation program to young people growing up in some of the most disadvantaged neighborhoods on the south side of Chicago. These are the 6 schools that we are working in, both last year and this year. That, I don't know if you can see it, there's kind of a shaded in area. This is the catchment area, so for every student who is living or going to those schools are living in that area. You can see they're concentrated on the deep red on the south side of Chicago. We are also in talks with Chicago Public Schools about the results whenever they come out. We have people who are very excited, so hopefully if we see something promising, that there are already policymakers at the table ready to move on that evidence. This is something that we think of is not a silver bullet. It's not a replacement for everything else that's going on in the school systems. Different organizations, different individuals are delivering wonderful things to our young people. But because of that reduced bandwidth, it's often hard for our students to take full advantage of everything else that people are delivering, which makes the teacher's job more difficult, which makes the coach's job more difficult, which makes parents' jobs much more difficult. And so we think of quiet time as a tool to really act as that foundation, unlocking students' cognitive bandwidth so they can fully take advantage of everything else that is being offered. We also think there is a national appetite for this. As with other programs that we have delivered in the past, when results come out, people will act on them because it is, we are the most skeptical skeptics, we think, when it comes to research and evaluation. And with hard data, it's not something about whether you believe it or whether I believe it or what your favorite program is, but the numbers tell the true story. So as in the past, we think we have a national audience, and there is a way, if we can show the impact, that this can have real, it could be really powerful, helping out alleviate some of the stressors for our young people growing up in these disadvantaged communities.
Panel, which you're going to be a part of, but first we want to run a video. Just sort of back up your words.
This year, one of my students was killed 20 minutes after leaving my class.
They're dealing with a difficult home situation because of drugs, because of alcohol, because of abuse, because of broken families.
Stress is what creates problems in students, making them fight out.
If we're not able to find solutions, these children may be lost.
All right, class, we're ready. Quiet time starts now.
This helps to reduce the violence in schools because kids begin to think.
It helps you clear your mind.
Before I was meditating, I would get in a lot of fights.
The meditation calmed me down.
TM makes me happier. And in the morning, after when I meditate, I feel good. I release all the stress that I have at night.
A moment of pause is significant for these kids.
I used to always get angry, but now since I started doing TM, it's like, just brush it off. Your grades will get better, your attitude will get better, your life will get better.
If you look at the brain science on learning, everybody knows kids can't learn if they're not emotionally ready to learn.
When our girls come in and they are just a wreck, and then they do quiet time, it's like it just smooths that out. And they walk out of the room feeling normal, feeling centered. And that's huge.
It's a great way of releasing all the stress out.
When I meditate, I feel like everything's gonna be okay and that there's always a solution.
When I'm done meditating and I open my eyes, that peace still stays with me.
When they come out of the meditation, they're more ready to learn because they now have this tool to be more aware of their own emotions and more settled, more centered, less reactive.
People's grades are going up, their behavior's changing, and there's just a better atmosphere around the school because everybody seems a little bit happier.
What starts to happen is students start to discover within themselves endless potential.
I was getting grades 60s, 70s, and then I got introduced to meditation, and like my grades went up to 80s and 90s.
It is urgent that we start now with the Transcendental Meditation in all of our schools and our community.
This work is about breaking destructive cycles of behavior. It's about being given the tools to truly reach one's full potential.
Meditation allows children to have hope and that they can be one of the answers to making this a better world for everyone.
So we're going to invite John to come back up along with, I'll introduce them as they come up. They're coming up in the wrong order, always like that.
All right, do it again.
This is George Rutherford. He is the National Director of the U.S. Center for Stress-Free Schools. He has been a public educator and a principal for 53 years, God bless you. For 20 of those years, he served as the principal and chief operating officer of the Fletcher Johnson Educational Center in Washington, D.C., where he pioneered the use of Transcendental Meditation-based Quiet Time program in 1994. Dr. Rutherford is now the principal of Ideal Academy Public Charter School in the district, where Quiet Time is incorporated into the daily schedule. And this is Rena Boone, who is the Quiet Time coordinator at Ideal Academy Public Charter School. She has been a classroom teacher, educator, and consultant, as well as a TM teacher for the past 35 years. Another God bless you. She is currently the director of the TM Quiet Time program at Ideal in Washington. She has devoted her life to transforming the field of education through the holistic development of students to achieve their full potential. This has inspired Rena to continue to share her knowledge of TM with others, bringing a solution to the epidemic of stress in our nation's schools. So welcome to the panel. Rena, let me start with you. How has the program worked for you, and what have you seen sort of across the years as it's been instituted?
Yes, I've been at Ideal for 7 years now, and it's been phenomenal transformation. And I would even say I get to witness miracles every single day of my life when I go to school, because I have the before and after pictures. I am working with students who come to school stressed. Many of our students live in homeless shelters. Many of our students come to school having gone through something before they ever enter the building. And working with them before starting the day, sitting down and having a quiet time, helping the brain to reset, helping to get rid of that stress that would otherwise cause them not to focus in the classroom, not to achieve, not to be their best selves. When I work with students, I am always amazed at this. When I give them an introduction and I ask them, what would you like to see in your life change? How would you like to see Transcendental Meditation improve your life? And the number one reason why they want to learn how to meditate is to get rid of anger. I see 10-year-olds riddled with anger. And the second reason is I want to be able to focus. I want to be able to learn. So I have the before and the after picture. One boy said to me after 2 days of meditating, I never knew there was so much silence in the world. From year to year, when the students start meditating, I can see a difference, a change from year to year. The students who have been meditating 1 year, 2 years, 3 years into practicing TM are transformed. They start out with not even being able to sit in a seat and wiggly and talking and anxious and jumping up. After 2 or 3 years, they're poised. They're walking in the hallways, poised. Their manners, beautiful. And I just see this year after year after year, and I am so grateful that I get to be a part of this silent transformation that's going on in our world and in our communities. Thank you.
And before Candy asks the question, I just want to say that this man sitting to my left is a true American hero. When you see all these programs that are being done in schools all over the world, and from those military programs and all these other things, it was Dr. I could cry, Dr. George Rutherford in 1994, after he visited a school of happy kids at Maharishi School of the Age of Enlightenment out in Iowa. He wanted his kids to be happy in Washington, D.C. He spawned the whole thing. So I just have to say, he is a great...
And I agree. Well said. So, Dr. Rutherford, you have to be full of stories of how this has transformed a single student, a classroom, a school. Tell us about your kind of journey with TM.
Well, you know, it's just good to look at so many folks out here now that we can talk about Transcendental Meditation and they didn't hide from us. No, when we started, and the reason we got quiet time is because we couldn't talk about Transcendental Meditation, and we had to figure a way that we could get the time in and let folks know that we were doing something, but not exactly what we were doing. You know? So we had to take 5 minutes from each class period to set up 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon to have our quiet time. We did not allow anyone to come in the school during that time, nor did we allow the students to go. It was at Fletcher Johnson, which is located in Southeast Washington. But we told in 1997, when I knew I was getting ready to retire, I told the superintendent that she could come visit us, but she had to get there on time because we were doing our quiet time and she couldn't come in any time. She had to come during the time we were not doing quiet time because we would not allow her in the door. But you know, over the years, I have seen, so many of my students who people had written off. I got a lot of them that has finished college, and it was because of Transcendental Meditation. One of our problems, we did not have it in high school, but I have students coming back. The last student that I know, we had 3 students graduate about 3 years ago, and we got some in college now. In 2005, David Lynch came to our school. He had promised me he was going to give us the first $25,000 that he would get for his foundation. And he did. But I had another great friend who's sitting right down there, Aberson. Jeffrey gave the other $25,000. And that's the way we started our Quiet Time program at Ideal. Prior to that, our Quiet Time program at Ideal was supported by John Hagelin and Jeffrey Aberson. And we had a lady named Elizabeth Rice Arnold who worked with us to try to get funds in. But it's because of good people, people who believe in young people, and people that believed in me, that we were able to do what we have done. I can't take full credit for it because that was my job as an educator. We all have to take credit for working with the TM programs in the schools. Bobby, wonderful. We get what we need from Bobby, and sometimes get
My
a little
mother
more.
calls me Bobby, and George calls me Bobby.
But, you know, we've just been blessed. I always tell the folks, I've been blessed by the man that sat high and looked low. So, you know, I can't go wrong. Ideal will not go wrong. Many times they have tried to close us down, but they have not been able to do so. So I just hope that you all will go out and work with other schools in the community. Chicago need help. We need help. Please help us to work with our children. And they're yours children too. Okay, so it is important that we all come together to work for the children. And it's so good to see so many people in here. It's good.
John, tell me sort of exactly what questions do you want answered in the research? What are the questions?
So I think the biggest question is, if we know that this problem of traumatic stress is pervasive across many of our neighborhoods, does the implementation of the Quiet Time program empirically alleviate that stress? So I think number one is, does implementing Quiet Time program reduce stress and increase that cognitive bandwidth? How are we going to measure that? Number one, we want to know, does participating in Quiet Time help with student engagement and increase academic achievement? So we're looking at attendance, grades, test scores. We're also hoping to do some more qualitative work to understand what is happening with the mechanisms inside the young people to drive those changes. And then also, does participating in the Quiet Time program have an impact on behaviors, both in school and out of school? So looking at suspensions, looking at misconducts, and then also looking at crime rates. Does participating in the program help lower those rates of misconduct and infractions, meaning that students are utilizing that tool to make better decisions as they're trying to navigate very difficult and complex situations.
And I would just like to add here that we're very grateful to the Crime Lab, because the University of Chicago Crime Lab has helped raise from private funding over $2.5 million for these studies. And it really, I think one of the reasons why you selected it is because of the research and the experience we had in dozens of schools all over the country that showed significant reductions in suspensions, in expulsions, improvements in grade point average, all these different areas that are very important for learning. But what's wonderful is the focus of the David Lynch Foundation, the focus of the Abramson Center for Peace is now systemic change. How do we, Dr. Jamie Grant loves this term, systemic change. How do we take something that you've heard stories about here that can help this school, that school, that school, that school, get Title I funding from the federal government, or get reimbursement from the Veterans Administration of the Department of Defense. So this is now, we're looking at these high-level studies, research studies, to really unequivocally demonstrate, one way or the other, the effectiveness of the program. Any one last thing from each of you? Or okay.
I would like to read a poem.
Okay.
That was written by one of my students.
Excellent, Doc. Excellent.
She calls it a spirit of calm. I think we're done. A spirit of calm, peace, strength, patience, and purpose that follows me throughout the day. A spirit of calm that is released from within, a completion of me. This student is in 6th grade.
So we're going to take, we had a 20-minute break, but we're going to do 10 minutes because we have 2 more sessions, one about work that we're doing at the Ark in the east of the Anacostia River, and then the other, we have Dr. John Hagelin connecting by Zoom or Skype or something. It's going to give a very big picture of the impact that meditation, transcendental meditation, can have on societal stress. So let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back. And thank you all very, very, very much. Perfect.
This is a rough neighborhood. And it becomes a struggle for a lot of the kids. It becomes a struggle.
There's a lot of angry people in the Bronx.
When I'm with my friends, I always make sure we're looking around because you never know, things happen.
They're dealing with a difficult home situation because of drugs, because of alcohol, because of abuse, because of broken families. What they've internalized is that they're not good enough, they're not smart enough. They walk in the door feeling like they don't have a shot.
You know, college, for most of the people here, that's their only out. And if they don't really seize that opportunity, it's possible bad things can happen.
I was seeking tools to help students deal with the realities of their social emotional life, their mental, physical changes as a teenager, and all of the demands that we were putting on them academically. And one of my teachers came to me and said, hey, there's this thing about teaching kids meditation.
When I first heard about quiet time, I did not like it at all. But when I first tried it, it came so easy to me. All teenagers, when they come into school first period, they do not want to do nothing. They just want to sleep. It does give you rest to regenerate like a battery. Before, I held everything in, and when I couldn't take it anymore, I took it out on somebody else. Now, it just goes away now. Even the teachers, when they do quiet time, they don't want to take things out on us for saying the wrong thing. It's like they're more calm also.
I think the focus has definitely gone up. The students are way more in tune with what they have to do.
People's grades are going up, their behavior's changing, and there's just a better atmosphere around the school because everybody seems a little bit happier.
After the first meditation, I said I feel like a brand new person.
I remember the beginning of freshman year. I used to do bad in school. I was getting grades 60s, 70s, probably 80s sometimes. And then I got introduced to meditation, and my grades went up to 80s and 90s.
What starts to happen is students start to discover within themselves endless potential.
When I do quiet time, I close my eyes and I feel like all the stress is just leaving my body, all the situations and problems are just clearing out. My friends were like, you're so calm now, you're not stressed out about anything. I was like, yeah, it's this quiet time, it's so wonderful. It really has helped me a lot.
If you're going through problems at home or even problems within yourself, a couple of my friends, they have suicidal thoughts sometimes. So any problem in general, it is worth it. I feel like it could save somebody's life.
It could be the difference between that child getting into an altercation after school. It could save lives across the city.
Now we're actually getting students to apply to top-tier colleges, making that dream a possibility. I always tell the students, when you see for yourself what I see for you, when you see in yourself what I see in you, then I'm doing my job. I believe that meditation is a tool that every single human being should have, just like we teach students math and science and social studies and English, and just like we mandate physical education, we need to teach students transcendental meditation. This is something that should be foundational in education.
this here represents the surface of life. Surface. And we see surfaces, you know, surfaces. And about 300 years ago, scientists, they started wondering what was this wood, and what was this metal, and what was it really? So they start looking into matter. So this side is matter, and this side is mind. Mind and matter. And the scientists, well, they discovered molecules. Deeper they went, and they discovered these atoms. And like I say, they thought that was the smallest particle for a long time. All these things we learn about in school. They went deeper, and they find inside the atoms these little electrons and neutrons and protons. And they went deeper and deeper and deeper, smaller and smaller particles, smaller and smaller particles. They found 4 forces. On a deeper level, the 4 became 3. And on a deeper level, the 3 became 2. And then, about 30 years ago, modern science, quantum physics, discovered the unified field. The unity of all the particles and all the forces of matter, of creation. Not only did they discover the unified field, but they found that everything that is a thing emerges from this field of no thing. Unmanifest it is. Unmanifest. It is no hyphen thing, but all things come from it. Anything that is a thing has emerged from this field of unity. It's oneness. The scientists know this exists, but if they wanted to get there, you can't get there. It's unmanifest. You can't walk into this field. But any one of those scientists could practice a technique, Transcendental Meditation, which, remember, true happiness is not out there. You're given a mantra, a very specific sound, vibration, thought. Very specific. It needs to be life-supporting at all deeper levels. And that mantra that you're given, that Maharishi gives, the key that opens the door. The mantra turns the mind within, turns the awareness within, and you naturally dive. Why is it natural? Because each deeper level of mind and each deeper level of intellect has more happiness. And the deeper levels of mind and deeper levels of intellect correspond to deeper levels of matter. At the borderline of intellect, you transcend. Transcend is the key word. It means to go beyond. You're going beyond field of relativity, duality, experiencing oneness. Pure, unbounded, infinite consciousness. This consciousness has qualities: infinite creativity, intelligence, energy, love, power, and bliss. Dynamic, ease. Always been there, never had a beginning, it is and it will be forever. Unbounded, infinite, eternal, immutable, immortal consciousness, fullness. Any human being can experience this easily and effortlessly with Transcendental Meditation. Transcendental Meditation is just a vehicle to get you here. When you experience this level, you enliven it, and it grows in the individual. So if you started with a ball of consciousness this big, everyone has consciousness. Consciousness is the way to understand consciousness. If you took it away, you'd see what it really is. If there wasn't any consciousness, we wouldn't exist. And if we did exist, we wouldn't know it. It's the I amness of life. It is life itself. Tied to consciousness is all this: creativity, intelligence, energy, love, power, bliss, dynamic peace, all positive, light of unity, all positive. You experience this level and you enliven it, and this ball of consciousness that you thought was just going to stay the same for the rest of your life starts expanding, and these qualities expand. So day by day, you're growing creativity, intelligence, love, energy, and this ball of consciousness is now expanding, and you're owning unconscious or subconscious more and more and more. Side effect of the growth of this consciousness is negativity starts to recede, tension, write all these things, stress, anxiety, sorrow, depression.
No, we're not starting.
Anger.
All right.
Hate, fear, all starts to go. Can't live in the light of this.
I want to start.
In schools, when there's stressed anxiety, horror stories, depression, so many people on pharmaceutical drugs, suicides, shootings, stabbings. You give a student this technique. It's easy to do. It's not concentration, it's not contemplation. Concentration, contemplation keep you right on the surface. You're not transcending. It's this field that does everything for the human being. This field. And you experience this field when you really get there and transcend. This is transcendental consciousness. It's, there's so many names for this field. The Tao, Kingdom of Heaven, all these names for this one field, the absolute, totality. In Vedic language, this field is called Atma.
Kathleen?
A-T-M-A, means the self.
I need to set up the John Hagelin and the...
Right now?
No, but it's going to be
Know
science
thyself.
and sit back and...
Get there. Know it by being it. Unfold it. And what you're doing is unfolding your full potential as a human being. Your full potential of the beautiful human being is called enlightenment.
Kathleen?
And people can unfold their enlightenment.
They follow you. They'll figure it out. No, I think you should look out because you're talking to them really. I'm just, ignore me and talk to them.
Okay. Tell me when you're rolling. Ed? Okay.
Yeah,
Welcome
I'm not
back.
rolling.
Yeah.
So welcome back. We're now going to focus in a little more closely to the DC area. Rena came back to see us again. We're also joined by Reagan Ford, who is the director of Levine Music in the Southeast Campus located at the Arc in Washington, D.C. As an arts administrator, Reagan has served the east of the river community for over 10 years, specifically bringing music education and programming towards 7 and 8, which includes the community surrounding the Arc. Reagan has a natural gift for serving the youth through her young at heart demeanor. That's what it says right here. And an approachable personality. We'll see about that.
Yeah.
Candy's tough.
We're also joined by Freda Plesser, who is the Executive Vice President for the David Lynch Foundation. After 15 years as a practicing attorney, Freda got smart and entered the no, that doesn't say that. It says Freda entered the nonprofit arena to focus on bringing services and relief to underserved communities. Prior to joining the foundation, Freda was Senior Vice President, Chair, and Executive Director of the Michael Tyler Fisher Center for Education of the Intrepid Museum in Manhattan. Well, over a drink, I'll ask you what that was. As an attorney, she was an Associate General Counsel for the Securities Industry Association and litigation partner for Tenzer Greenblatt LLP, currently known as Blank Rome LLP. You hold a BS from Cornell and a JD from Fordham. So let me start with an overarching question just to you, Freda. So the David Lynch Foundation has recently opened a community meditation center at the Ark. What was the thinking behind that? Why there? Why was that picked?
So there are a lot of reasons for that. So how this came to be, for those of you who don't know, the ARC is an acronym for Town Hall Education Arts Recreation Campus. It is located in Ward 7 in Southeast Washington. Ward 8, sorry, Southeast Washington, serving Wards 7 and 8. There's 140,000 residents in those two wards. The unemployment poverty rates are 2 and 3 times higher than the rest of DC. And there's many associated health concerns that the medical folks, the Children's National Health System, which is located there, have noticed much higher rates of cardiovascular disease and stress-related illness. So the ARC, which you see a picture of, is a 110,000 square foot campus, which was built about 10,000 years ago. Yeah. Very old.
I'm like,
wow.
Big
At the time, it was way ahead of its time.
Okay, dial that back, rewind the tape. 110,000 square foot campus built about 10 years ago. And the goal of the ARC is it's a campus where the visionaries who developed the ARC wanted to bring together services and programs that would serve the residents of Wards 7 and 8. And the services are arts, like the Levine School of Music and Washington Ballet. It's programs for under-resourced youth, the Boys and Girls Club. It's in the arts. Washington Ballet is a nonprofit partner there. And of course, Children's National Health System, one of the most renowned hospital systems in the country, focusing on pediatric illness. So the ARC was really a visionary concept, and in the same way that the ARC wanted to be the first of its kind in the country to be replicated elsewhere and bring all these services under one roof, as they say, to serve folks cradle to grave. We too wanted to be a part of that, and about 3 years ago, one of the board members at the ARC, together with Jane Ottenberg, Richard Crichton, and the Abramsons, were over dinner, as things happen, we're realizing that what the Transcendental Meditation program, our program, would be a wonderful supplement and a tool that would be an adjunct to all of the services and programs already being offered there. So for us, and being in Washington, D.C., it's a model, it's a showcase, and it's a research opportunity for us to bring what we do to folks that need it and to study it, and then it can be replicated everywhere.
So, Reagan, you teach music, or in charge of the music program at the ARC, the Center to the ARC. How, and you practice TM?
Yes.
So how has TM impacted your program? How has it impacted, or how do you see it impacting the kids?
Okay. One thing that is constant in the East of the River community is change. When I was growing up, when I went home, I knew my parents would be there. I knew what bed I was going to sleep in. I knew, I was going to eat. A lot of the families that come to the ARC, they live day to day, and they don't know these things. So what TM has done is been able to bring a constant in their life. There's something that they have internally that is theirs, that they can practice and add to their life to release that stress. So I have a summer camp, and the campers are 6 to 11-year-olds. That is a handful. So, I just was like, we're going to have some silence in the beginning of camp so that, just to see if this helps. And by the 3rd week of camp, in the middle of the day, when the kids are like, whoo, they're like, I just need some silence right now. And so I'm finding it's something that you walk around with. It's yours. And regardless if you don't know where you're going to be able to go in the afternoon, I've had families where I had a young man, percussion student, who got to his lesson late because he was jumped at the bus stop. And so he fought his way literally to his lesson. I've had families where a little girl, 6 years old, sister was murdered and found in a building. And see, these are things that they're dealing with on a daily basis. So to be able to bring TM to them, something that is going to stay with them and is never going to change, is a wonderful thing.
So how about you personally?
So, so the ARC has built a new building, and we heard the David Lynch Foundation was going to be a new partner. So we got this email from the ARC's board saying, "Oh, you should go check out this program that's coming to the ARC." I'll admit, I did not know who David Lynch was. I had not heard of Transcendental Meditation. No, I watched Twin Peaks, but I don't know.
Okay. All right. Then it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I watched Twin Peaks, but I didn't know. And so it was like, you should go to this breakfast. It's at the Peace Institute. You're going to have a great time. And I'm like, okay, there's going to be a bunch of granola and incense. I'm just, this is what in my mind I'm thinking. So I go, and it was this wonderful presentation. There were people like me, professional people there. And I was sitting there and I was like, well, they've gone over PTSD, or they were going over abuse and, drugs. I was like, well, I don't have those stress, but I have stress. I work in an environment and I didn't really realize how, I pour myself into what I do. I love what I do. I love going to work, but I find that sometimes I take that stuff home. And I didn't realize it then until I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, I have stress. So as I'm leaving there, I think I found the one thing that could go wrong, Dr. Teta. As I'm leaving, I'm Googling on my phone, TM, walking across the street, almost got hit by a car. So that could be the one thing, But literally by the time I got in my car, I had found the TM Center here in Washington, D.C. So that program was early January. I had completed all my training by January 27th and have been practicing TM since. So that's how I...
Pretty amazing. That's quick work. Rena, in the Ideal Academy, you brought in the caregivers for some of these children as well as the parents into the TM program. Do you see that application in the ARC?
Absolutely. I am so happy that we will be able to bring this to the ARC because, as you know, think about it. The basic unit of society is the family. And some of our families nowadays, in this world in which we are living, are stressed. It's not enough for the children to come to school and learn Transcendental Meditation and then go home to a stressed family life. Children, you talk about PTSD. There are children, like you were saying, Reagan, who have family members murdered. That is PTSD. And so when we can bring TM into the whole family structure, we are doing something to really bring about the transformation for the world that is so needed. And so I've been very grateful that we are able to bring this to parents, to caregivers. Children, some of the students, when they learn TM, first thing they say is, I want my mother to have this. I want my father to have it. Oh, my mother would really need this. And the parents come in. I want to tell you one story. There was a young mother who came to a TM intro. We have a meditation room in our school. How cool is that? And she came to the intro, and she just looked so stressed. And she said, I feel so bad because I yell at my children a lot, and I don't want to. I'm just stressed. She learned TM. Her stress started going away. She had the biggest smile on her face. Her children said, our mom has changed. She's way easier to talk to now, and way easier to talk to our problems about. And her son said, Transcendental Meditation is something that you do because it helps you to think before you do. It helps you to reflect as you are going about doing what you do. And that's what I love about it, because I'm not reacting all the time. That family was transformed. The family is happy now. And this is the vision. This is the vision for the Ark, that we can reach out to all of these amazing families and give them a way to manage stress. I asked the children the other day, what would it be like if everyone in your family were meditating? They said, well, there would be less yelling, slamming the doors. There would be more peace in the home, more quiet. They all talk about that quiet because now they know where the silence and the quiet is. It's within. And this is what's going to transform this generation and the next generation and going forward. We have just begun.
Greta, let me give you the last question here as we wrap this up, and that is, what are your, like, what's your vision? You know, like shining city on the hill. What do you want TM to do inside the Ark? What's your goal?
So the fortuity of being invited to be the 14th partner of the Ark was sort of amazing, because it was at the same time that Bob and our board had decided, because we'd been invited into Washington. We were told it's time to come help make policy. There's all you have the research. People understand what this is. People understand stress and trauma, and it's now time to work in Washington, to work on Capitol Hill to try to affect long-term systemic, change in legislation and policy. So at the same time, we have an office on Capitol Hill at the Abramson Center for Peace, and in that office, we are meeting with lawmakers and influence makers to figure out the best ways to impact policy, get changes in insurance reimbursements for veterans, for opioid addiction, for all the many areas that you've seen today. For every one of those, funding is needed to have more research, to bring more, expose it to more people. So at the same time, we have the Ark, and the Ark is in Washington, and it's going to be a showcase to replicate our work in all of these areas. And it's going to be a place that we can do research as well. So, I mean, it's sort of all of the many factors that the many people that have been working on these issues for decades are all coming together now at this really unique point in time where we feel like the possibilities are limitless, and this is going to happen really fast. And I just have to say, Rena, as mesmerizing as she is, will be the regional director, directing our work at the Ark, and you can see why. It's going to be amazing. And Simone Williams, we have a new director of marketing, and we are really hitting the ground running. We've done the groundwork has been laid. Our office is open in November, and in January we already have demand for our courses and our work, and partners that want to work with us like Reagan. So this is on its way.
So we pivot now to our last section, and this is going to be a change of pace. We're going to look at something bigger, broader. We're going to look at the impact that meditation, transcendental meditation, can have when small numbers of people practice it, the spillover effect it can have on the rest of a community, a family, a community, a city, a nation, a world, that somehow, and we're going to understand the somehow in a moment, somehow on a very profound level, we're connected together and we influence each other. We're not just separate beings that just bump into each other, but there's a level of connectedness. And there's been, over the last 30 years, an extraordinary amount of research, often done under the radar, that showed very clearly that we do influence each other when we meditate. And it's not an influence like I'm thinking positive thoughts or I want peace for the world. It's an influence of remember when I started this whole 3 days ago when we started this thing, when the mind, the active, agitated, excited thinking mind during this meditation effortlessly, key word, effortlessly, naturally, gently settles down, and we access calmer, cooler levels of the mind, and then we access what scientists call a state of restful alertness, what the ancient meditation teachers called unbounded pure consciousness or unified field of consciousness, what physicists now call the unified field, but a level deep within where we are connected, we are accessing our own deepest nature, but also accessing, the theory goes, the deepest level of nature. And when we do that, when I settle down and my cortisol levels go down and my brain lines up, when I do that, it has a powerful, the theory is, it has a powerful impact on the environment. Our next speaker and our final speaker, Dr. John Hagelin, who also couldn't get out of Chicago. He is the president of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace. He's also the president of Maharishi University of Management, again, an unbelievably extraordinary university. Jeffrey Abramson is the chairman of the board of trustees there. He's going to take 45 minutes or so. I want you to sit back, and we're going to get into some deep theory. We're going to talk science. We're going to talk physics. We're going to talk consciousness. We're going to talk about something, and he's going to talk about it, but the reason I'm so excited about it is, what do we do with our increasingly stressed out world? What do we do when whole societies and whole nations are exhibiting the qualities of post-traumatic stress collectively? Hyperreactivity, substance abuse, violent behavior. Can something be done that doesn't require everyone meditating? And so, if you would like to read John's.
Well, you pretty much did it, but in addition to being president of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace, Dr. Hagelin is a renowned quantum physicist, science and public policy expert, an educator, an author, and a leading proponent of peace. He spent much of the last quarter century leading a scientific investigation into the foundations of human consciousness. He is one of the world's preeminent researchers on the effects of meditation on brain development and the use of meditation to address critical problems in the field of education, rehabilitation, crime and social violence, and post-traumatic stress. He's also a former president of the David Lynch Foundation, so intimately familiar with its work.
So get ready. We're changing gears here. It's physics and consciousness, and then Jeffrey Abramson will be back to wrap it up. John Hagelin.
Thank you very much, Candy. Thank you very much, Bobby. I am really grateful that all of you have come to be present at this extremely moving and very, very interesting seminar today. My contribution to it will be wearing my hat of the president of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace, which is an organization, global organization of leading scientists and Nobel laureates dedicated to the cause of peace and nuclear disarmament, and a group that has been really at the forefront of implementing what we could call the brain-based approach to peace. Excuse me, I got to get this to work. Is that advancing? Yes, it is. Thank you. The brain-based approach to peace, the core elements of which you've become very familiar with already today. There are 5 basic steps in logic in what we call this brain-based approach to peace. At least 4 of them you are already very familiar with. The first, of course, is that, is that behavior, human behavior, is closely linked to human brain functioning. That, for example, how we see our environment, whether we perceive it as a threat, for example, depends upon the level of excitement of the amygdala or fear center. Our behavior is governed a great deal by the level of development of the prefrontal cortex or higher brain and so forth. As we've heard today, stress impairs the brain, and as a consequence, it negatively impacts human behavior, leading, for example, to violence and crime and behavioral problems in school. The next step in this logic is that societal stress fuels crime and social violence. And there's a great deal of research to indicate that the level of intensity of societal stress is a key driver in the incidence of violence and crime and other indications of social stress. And I don't need to go in great deal into that. We've had wonderful speakers on this topic already. Step 4, we've also heard today, that is that TM very powerfully reduces stress and as a consequence improves health and behavior. We have seen that the meditative state is a state of very deep physiological rest, much deeper than sleep, and as a consequence is a very powerful stress buster, reducing stress and stress-related disease, which is in fact most disease. For example, reductions in blood pressure through regular practice of the TM technique is far deeper and more powerful than what you would find from what is generally considered to be normal stress-reducing practices or relaxation techniques or even meditation techniques. What's happening during TM is much deeper. The level of rest is much deeper. And more interestingly, even than blood pressure is the end state of heart disease, heart attack, stroke, premature death is markedly reduced in comparison to controls in people who are at risk of heart disease, heart attack, and stroke. And this was a 10-year longitudinal study funded by the National Institutes of Health and saw really striking and statistically highly significant reductions in heart attack, stroke, and death. So we're familiar with the stress-reducing impact of transcendental meditation and its effect on health. More interesting perhaps to an educator and more interesting to this talk is the effect of meditation on brain functioning and on brain development. Different levels of relaxation, different techniques of meditation invoke very different responses from the brain. Concentration or focused attention, shown at the top of this chart, is a very intense and very high frequency application of our awareness. Concentration requires work, and the brain is really working during a concentration practice. More relaxed is a level of what we could call open monitoring. Mindfulness meditation falls into this category. And the mental signature is really quite different from that of the highly active practice of concentration. At the basis of this chart is what the research literature calls automatic self-transcending. In this day and age, that means transcendental meditation. And the activity in the brain is, again, completely different from more active states of brain functioning. And you could perhaps almost see it here, but these squiggles represent the electrical activity of the brain at different points all across the brain, from the front of the brain to the back of the brain. And throughout this chart, which is during the meditative state, you can probably almost see that the entire brain is functioning in concert, so to speak. There's a high degree of synchrony and coherent functioning during the meditative state. And that contrasts from normal eyes closed rest or normal relaxation shown on the left. So we see on the right a very highly integrated functioning of the brain across the entire brain, something called global EEG coherence. Certainly very interesting, but also practically very important, because this type of brain development, the increasing coherent functioning of the brain, translates, according to research, to improved memory and learning ability, improved academic performance, increased intelligence or IQ, enhanced psychological stability, emotional maturity, moral reasoning, creativity. In fact, all of the measures that are commonly used for intelligence in an educational setting, all of these measures are highly statistically significantly improved just by adding TM to the school day. And similar improvements are found in much older subjects as well. Harvard University did a fairly major study some years ago on the effect of TM on the elderly, the institutionalized elderly, meaning those who are essentially in nursing homes, and found a very significant increase in mental acuity, in memory, in alertness, and surprisingly, longevity, a major increase in the length and quality of life. This increased intelligence, of course, is one of the driving factors for the accelerating rollout and increasing demand for TM in education today, where we have the Transcendental Meditation program introduced in literally thousands of schools, not just in the US, but across the world, involving millions of students It sort of began, as you perhaps not surprisingly, in San Francisco, but it has spread throughout the US and across the world. And the results of this implementation of this 10 to 20 minutes, it's more like 10 to 12 minutes for younger students, so-called quiet time in the schools, has really been remarkable in terms of academic performance, dropout rates, graduation rates. And Doc Rutherford, hello, Doc, the earliest innovator in this very, very important new educational, I could almost call it a revolution, or it seems to be turning into one. Now, in the absence of a powerful technique to systematically reduce stress, over time, we accumulate stress. And a stressed brain is not a healthy brain. Under situations of acute stress or chronic stress, the prefrontal cortex, shown at the top of this chart on the right, the prefrontal cortex shuts down. The blood gets shunted to the reactive brain, so to speak. This is called the fight or flight response. And it's not a good state of psychology to be in. If you're a student in school, as was shown in a very important study at American University some years ago, the effect of stress and the effect of TM on reducing stress and its impact on scholastic achievement. Very significant study. But not just students. When the higher brain is shut down, which is where our judgment and moral reasoning and the ability to consider the implications of our actions, if that shuts down in a state of fight or flight, we really have no impulse control. And that leads, among other things, to, well, ADHD, of course, lack of impulse control, but it leads to crime. And that is a state of the brain functioning of a great many, most of our incarcerated felons in the United States and around the world. And it's a pretty strong test of the effectiveness of transcending on reducing acute stress that leads to crime when we consider the 24 studies that have been done in prisons involving prison inmates, incarcerated felons, and the very, very significant reduction in recidivism rates among those subjects. There's no program in the prisons thus far that has this kind of a track record at preventing future crime by actually rehabilitating inmates and not just warehousing them and releasing them and subsequently, in many cases, readmitting them. We have seen today the remarkable effectiveness of this deep, deep rest of meditation on acute stress in the context of our military and our veterans. It's very, very moving. The effectiveness of transcending or this deep meditation in comparison to other methods is quite striking. And the recent research funded by the DoD and implemented by the Veterans Administration really shows that this technique seems to be significantly more powerful even than the gold standard treatment of psychotherapy or prolonged exposure, and without the trauma or expense that those traditional techniques entail. And this has led to widespread implementation in the military. We've heard examples of this today, and in foreign militaries, the implementation is much, much broader still. So the final logic in what is called the brain-based approach to peace is that society-wide meditation, it doesn't have to involve everybody, but significant numbers meditating in an urban population or across a society diffuses societal stress, reduces the levels of tension and stress in society, and as a consequence, reduces crime and social violence, even open warfare and war-torn areas. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about actual empirical research with this, which is more important than theory, even though as a physicist, I love the theory. And I'm going to torture you briefly with some theory, but let's look at the effects, the actual published results. One of the most important historic studies on the application of meditation to reduce violence in society took place in the critical test case of the Middle East War. In the early 1980s, those of you my age will recall, there was a continuing war in the Middle East, and traditional approaches to conflict resolution and diplomacy were simply not taking root in an environment which was supercharged with stress, where the societal tensions and animosities were deeply and historically ingrained, And the paper treaties signed by representatives of nations were simply not strong enough to bind the citizens of those nations to a peaceful approach. So the war raged on. So this study here was done in part by Harvard researchers and many others who performed a critical test in a critical environment of gathering a group of long-term or advanced meditating subjects in Jerusalem within miles of the center of the conflict there in neighboring Lebanon. And what the dotted line shows here, as you can see the dotted line, is a rise and fall of the number of people who were available to practice their transcendental meditation as a group, which seems to have a bit of an amplified effect in comparison to those who might be scattered around the country, meditating at different times. And over the 60-day period, the numbers rose and fall almost on a daily basis. And superimposed upon that is a solid line that shows progress towards peace in the Middle East during that same 2-month period, which included 4 measures essentially: the number of war deaths on a daily basis, the number of war-related violence measured by bullets fired and bombs dropped, and progress towards peace among the rival factions, the diplomatic efforts bearing results, bearing fruits, as opposed to not bearing fruits, which had traditionally been the case. And this is just the raw data, but you can even see, without the benefit of statistical analysis, without even having to pull the signal from the noise, and sociological experiments are noisy experiments. They are filled with confounding factors. What are the police doing that day? What's happening in the weather? And so on and so forth. Everything can affect societal trends. But social science is a pretty sophisticated science empirically. And there are many, many techniques and very rigorous statistical methods to basically pull a small result, a small signal out of the noise. And even without applying the sophisticated statistical methods of social science, you can even see, I think, here with your eyes, a strong co-variation or correlation between the solid line, which is this war peace index improving with the number of people who happen to be gathered during the specific days and weeks of this 2-month experiment. This is a highly statistically significant result. It was more significant than 1 part per 1,000 that these results were not due to chance. In the social sciences, it's relatively rare to get a result with such high statistical significance. And this was published in the Journal of Conflict Resolution, published at Yale University, and probably the most prestigious and perhaps even, I would say, snooty journal in this field of conflict management. When it was published with almost a disclaimer from the editors. They said that this research has been held to a standard much higher than we normally require. But the hypothesis is so incredibly novel that perhaps 1,000 people could influence the behavior of 1 million that we have to publish it. It is, unassailable, and the quality of the research is high. But we request of the scientific audience that others replicate this study to see whether this could just be an incredible statistical fluke. Over the next 2.5 years, there were 6 further replications done by different groups. And each one of these applications of groups of meditators of sufficient size to have a likely effect on the pace of the war, all of them individually yielded highly statistically significant results, with an average reduction in war deaths and war violence by 80% during those periods, those interventions, as compared to the rest of the time in which there was no positive progress. And this, when you put these studies together, is a uniquely powerful statistical result. The likelihood of it being simply a statistical fluke is essentially 0. I'm going to give one more example of a study that's a little closer to home to those there who are in our nation's capital. I was involved, and so was Bob Roth, in a large group in Washington, D.C. in the summer of 1993. And since there had been at that point 49 previous studies of this nature, we decided that we would take a very public stance and do a very public demonstration project with 23 scientists on the panel of authors, including the chief of the Metropolitan Police Department there, DC MPD, and the top scholars of that, many top scholars of the area, and members of the city council. And the result of that experiment, and the purpose of it was to reduce crime in Washington, D.C., and within a short period to significantly reduce crime by 20% or more was the prediction based on previous studies. And if you look at what happened in Washington, D.C., as the group began in July with a relatively small trickle of people moving in from different parts of the country, and in the last couple of weeks, when people started to arrive from all over the world, nearly 4,000, then you saw a very statistically significant drop in crime. Again, this is significant statistically, better than 1 part in 10,000. Now, these are numbers. Significant numbers. The chief of police went on television just prior to the study and said, look, we're going to participate in this study, but I want you to know it's going to take 2 feet of snow in Washington, D.C. in August to reduce crime by 20% or more. He was obviously not confident of the results, but in the end was one of the signatories to the study. But these are numbers, and I want to put a human face on it. I was there, probably others were too. In that week, that period of time when the numbers grew large was really remarkable. The sirens that tended to be running all night long and making it difficult to sleep, and gunshots that were ringing out in parts of the city, which were audible to many, they just stopped. It was quite a remarkable transformation. I'll also mention that at that time, except for perhaps today, it was the most divided partisan period in our governmental history, where Clinton's was at the end of his first semester, and none of his cabinet appointees were being approved by the Senate. There was just an absolute divide at that time, if you recall. And so I want to just read 2 sentences from an article that was written right at the end of the first week, where after our numbers grew large, by Sally Quinn. For this, I might need a pair of glasses. Thank you. It's always good to have an assistant on hand. Okay, so Sally Quinn writes, the headline is, "What a Difference a Week Makes." And it starts, "What a difference a week makes. The Clinton administration appears to have revived. Washington has relaxed. But such a swift reversal of political fortune is not easy to account for. One might logically wonder whether Clinton really turned things around or if something else is going on. Somehow," she concludes, "as if magically from heaven, a calm has descended on this city." And that was the experience of everybody there. The transformation in the feeling level of the city was dramatic. So moving on, this study was, of course, a very important one historically, and was published, of course, in a highly regarded journal. So this, what we call brain-based approach to peace, based on collective practice of the TM technique by a small but non-negligible portion of a population, has been heavily validated now by 59 scientific demonstrations, summarized in 30 published studies and leading peer-reviewed scientific journals. I think it would be safe to say, it may sound strange to say, but safe to say, there's no other approach to peace with this kind of track record of success. And this has won support from the titans in conflict resolution and conflict management from all over the country. And it's kind of the end mostly of what I'm going to say about how well this works and how easy, in fact, it is to reproduce. I'd like to spend the rest of my minutes considering, well, how does it work? Now, I suspect to many today, it may seem intuitive, it may seem almost obvious that you have enough calmer people in society who are really experiencing ease and calm and are less stressed, that's going to have some trickle effect, some spillover effect into the surrounding society. But the numbers involved here are pretty small. 4,000 people in Washington, D.C., greater Washington, D.C. must be a few million. So we're talking about a relatively small proportion of the population. So that's a question. Another key question is, if you look at the 7 replications that were done in the Middle East during the peak of the Lebanon War, some of these studies made good sense, intuitive sense, because these were groups embedded right inside the conflict region, or certainly in the vicinity of the conflict. But there are other groups that were put into place to effect the violence in the Middle East that were much farther away, halfway across the world in 1 or 2 cases, where there was a group of over 8,000 people here in central United States, which had a highly statistically significant effect on the war in Lebanon. That's a long-range effect, obviously. And yes, it involved a lot of people, but we have to ask, if you're a physicist anyway, how would a group of people so far away, out of touch with the combatants in the Middle East, have an easing effect or settling effect or calming effect on those combatants, such that they might decide, well, I don't think I'm going to kill anybody today. So some of these, I would say, experimental interventions were quite sensible, intuitive, comprehensible. A few of them were rather incomprehensible because of the distance involved, at least on a common sense level. So I'm going to make some remarks, and I'm going to go quickly because the details aren't important unless you are a physicist and you really want the details. I won't dwell on the details. But what are the mechanics of this societal coherence? The physics, if you wish, of social coherence, especially creating an influence from a distance? Well, it involves basically an enhanced model of social interaction. Normally, we think that our thoughts are entirely within our brains, and to the extent that is true, would not be expected to have an influence far beyond the confines of our skull. We need a model that is going to account for sort of non-local or less localized influence or long-range influence, something that could be called a field effect of consciousness. And that makes some intuitive sense in the days of radios and long-range transmission, that there might be a field effect of consciousness. Perhaps consciousness is a field. But the question a physicist would ask is, well, but what field? I mean, the 4 familiar fields, gravity, etc., really are not likely candidates for this. Electromagnetism has received a great deal of thought in this regard, but most people consider it the electromagnetic influence radiating from our brains on a nearby subject is probably too small to have an effect, and certainly on a subject far away. And the other forces of nature are, pretty much irrelevant with respect to a phenomenon like this. Whenever this happens in physics, we are forced to look deeper into the deeper principles of nature, not just the macroscopic, obvious world of classical physics, but the microscopic world of the cells, the molecules, the atoms, and beyond. And so, in a nutshell, our universe is structured in hierarchical layers, from the surface or macroscopic observable world of classical physics involving things like bricks and planets, to the deeper world of quantum mechanics, which was invented to understand the physics of atoms, and deeper still, the world of quantum field theory, which was necessary to understand the deeper dynamics governing the atomic nucleus, 1,000,000 times smaller than the atom. In the last couple of decades, the smart money has moved to what are called unified field theories based on the superstring, exploring and detailing in exquisite mathematical sophistication the core unity of life, the fundamental laws of nature giving birth to all diversity in the universe. Now, this, leaving physics, is intimately related to the structure of not just outer nature, not just physical nature, but human nature. We are part of nature, and we share the structure of everything else in the universe, from macroscopic to cellular to molecular to atomic and nuclear. It's all in there. And if we even look at the structure of human mind, it also has a hierarchical structure. There's surface thoughts, articulated thought, like when is lunch, When finally will we really? That's a very articulated thought. You don't dare speak it, but you can certainly hear it in your mind. Subtler than that is abstract conceptual thought. This is the world of the mathematician and the physicist, but we can all think abstractly. That's what differentiates us as a species from others. Subtler than abstract conceptual thinking is fine, faint feeling, very delicate but pervasive level of our experience. It's subtle, but it colors everything else. And beyond that fine feeling is purely consciousness. It's the fundamental wakefulness or awareness at the basis of the mind. That's all quite intuitive, I think, but mathematicians have actually taken this levels of mind, levels of expanded human comprehension, and they really have developed it and quantified it. And this is something I will truly fly through. But every level of mind, every level of expanded human comprehension has its corresponding mathematical language, its corresponding level of logic. At the surface of mind, the most superficial and concrete mathematical logic is the counting numbers, 1, 2, 3. A little more expanded and powerful and complete than the counting numbers are the whole numbers that include 0. More complete and more powerful are the integers, which include the negative numbers. If you add the fractions between all of these numbers, you have the rational numbers, which are good enough for a life, a profession involved with accounting. If you go deeper still, you have what are called the more expanded or the real numbers, which are a prerequisite basically for doing physics, even classical physics. The complex numbers, which I won't describe, are essential in order to understand quantum mechanics, the world of the atom, the world of molecules. Beyond that, what are called limits of function spaces are required to understand the world of the atomic nucleus, quantum field theory. And so it goes to more and more expanded levels of mind, more and more hugely incomprehensible infinities, until you hit the largest conceivable infinity accessible to the human intellect. And beyond that, there is something that we cannot articulate clearly in mathematics, but we know it exists. We'll simply call it infinity beyond comprehension, or the universe of sets. That whole exercise was basically, again, to show that there are different expanded levels of human comprehension, and those levels of mind correspond intimately to deeper and deeper levels of nature. So, in this context, getting back home, getting back to something more relevant, I think, to us and to the conference, is in this light. What is meditation from the perspective of a mathematician or a physicist? Well, meditation is a process that begins from where we are, which is at the level of conscious thinking thought, normal, articulated thoughts. We can also draw it like this, the level of our surface thoughts. That's where we are right now. That's where the meditation process begins. Normally, thoughts, the whole process of thought is directed outwards. Thought begins as a very faint and abstract impulse deep within, very abstract feeling, which emerges and takes more and more concrete shape and gains more and more specificity as it goes through the mechanics of the thinking process, the machinery of the brain. And at some point, it becomes so concrete, we recognize that thought. Oh, lunch is finally here. That's the conscious thinking level. And now meditation begins there at the level of these surface thoughts. And it's a technique or a system of techniques that take the attention back within, that lead the mind very sweetly and innocently and naturally, essentially lure the mind sweetly within to experience deeper and deeper levels of mind, more abstract levels of the thinking process, until the finest impulse of thought is essentially transcended, is left behind. And at that point, the experiencer, surprise, is left with purely consciousness, pure, abstract, unbounded awareness. Throughout the ages, this has been called the meditative state, or samadhi, if you wish, in the literature of yoga. In modern ages, it's called a hypometabolic physiologic state, meaning a state of deep physiological rest, a state of restful alertness. So in this meditative state, And this, we're basically saying the structure of mind, which we explore systematically and effortlessly during meditation, corresponds to deeper and deeper levels of nature, that there's an intimate relationship between what we call physical nature and our human nature. Our physical body, made of physical matter, our subtler mind, which is not made of particles of matter, but is made essentially of what quantum mechanics is made of, and emotion and pure being. So these different levels of human nature, body, mind, fine feeling, pure consciousness or being, are governed by different laws, and they correspond to deeper levels of nature. And the reason I've gone into all of this is basically to explain one thing, to explain what then is the range of human influence? What is the range of my influence on my environment? Well, if I'm a physical creature and I think of myself as physical alone, then my reach is actually very limited. Basically, I can reach as far as I can reach, or as far as I can shout, perhaps. And that's my ability to influence people. But we are not just a physical body. We obviously have a highly developed mind beneath that. And the mind has greater reach because the mind is governed by and functions at the level of quantum mechanics, and the emotion, fine feelings, similarly so. And these levels of nature have a much longer reach. And this is due primarily to what is called, in the scientific literature, quantum entanglement. So we're going to take a few minutes to see what that is, and then we're going to come back to see how we use it in meditation and in the brain-based approach to peace. Quantum entanglement. Now, if you don't understand each of these words, doesn't matter. Just sort of follow my intention for a few minutes, and it'll be more than enough to conclude the lecture. The level of mind, level of expanded awareness, level of fine feeling, level of pure consciousness are in the realm of quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics has this remarkable property of what is called entanglement, which means objects that were in touch, objects that have been in contact, remain in contact forever. So let us consider an elementary particle called a pion, for example, a particle that very quickly decays into two particles of light, two photons flying off in opposite directions at the speed of light. Well, it so happens, you can show, that these particles of light, these photons, flying off in different directions, must have oppositely correlated spin. If one is up, the other must be down, because the total spin must add to zero, which is what the original system began with. The next thing I have to say is that either of these photons, let's take the one on the right, the result of quantum mechanics does not predict what its specific spin is. It could be upward or it could be downward. It is indeterminate. There's nothing in quantum mechanics that can predict that, and hence the indeterminacy of quantum mechanics that you may have heard about. Now, whatever that, so let us now introduce somebody, an observer, Betty Sue, to try and pin this vague situation down by actually looking to see what that particle spin is. Is that particle of light spinning down or is it spinning up? One way to determine that, and remember, quantum mechanics predicts neither. Quantum mechanics says that it is sort of both in some ghostly combination, some rather, I would say spooky coexistence of up and down. That's what quantum mechanics actually predicts. But when you actually look, you, of course, of necessity, pin it down. You're not going to see it in both states. And whatever you see, if Betty Sue sees down, you know that halfway across the universe, where the other photon has now reached, at that instant, that other photon, which was also previously undetermined, suddenly must be in the state of up, because the total spin must be zero. So this is very, very interesting in a sense that we do have, through the active observation, an influence immediately at a distance. If Betty Sue saw her photon was spin up, then the other one would instantly be spin down. So this situation of the effect of the observer located here in the laboratory on events taking place across the universe really freaked Einstein out. And this is actually why Einstein abandoned quantum mechanics in his midlife. And because he couldn't understand the idea of creating an influence instantaneously at a distance. It's so contrary to our material intuition. Einstein or not, however, this is indeed the case. And this is something that we exploit in the laboratory today in technologies like quantum computing or quantum encryption or quantum teleportation. Now, one key point as I wrap this part up, the entanglement of these two particles and their ability to influence each other at a distance depends on their previous interaction. And in this particular case, it's important that these have interacted in the past. And the more intimate the interaction, the more profound the correlation, the more profound the entanglement. In this particular case, these two particles came from the same mother. They emerged from the same pion. They came from a common source, and they are maximally entangled. Normally speaking, how do things get entangled? Well, objects like a glass of water store huge amounts of information at the quantum level. All these trillions of particles are in a state of motion, have their own positions, and that's all quantum information, and it's a lot of it. Or an empty shoebox also contains a huge amount of quantum information. How do things get entangled? When objects come into contact, like these two shoeboxes, they exchange and share a tremendous amount of information at the quantum level and therefore become entangled. They become correlated, and they forever remain entangled and have an effect on each other. And so that's very interesting. Now we know how things get entangled. What about human beings? Are human beings entangled? And the answer would be yes. When people come into contact with each other, physical or auditory or visual contact with each other, they share and exchange a huge amount of information at the quantum level and become thereafter entangled, meaning they will have an effect on each other from then on, at least for a while, until those correlations get diluted and perturbed. So quantum entanglements among peoples, like these Swedes and these Chinese, they depend on the frequency and intimacy of their interactions and the strength of their cultural bonds. Do these two groups, are they genetically closely tied? Do they share a common language? Do they watch the same media outlets, follow the same news? Do they interact frequently and intimately? And the answer is not so much. Those two societies function in significant part in isolation, and they don't have a strong entanglement with each other. If we take these, predominantly WASPy societies of the US and Canada, we could ask, well, are these groups genetically related? Do they share a common language mostly? Do they watch the same media outlets? In some cases, yes. Follow the same news? Unfortunately for the Canadians, yes. Do we interact frequently and intimately? Yes, to some degree. So these two populations are relatively intimately, closely entangled. And as a result, they are subject to a long-range influence on each other. If this is abstract, think of a mother and her child, and think of the closeness and intimacy of the bond between them. They tug at each other, even from a distance. They are closely entangled. If something drastic happens to the child, the mother is very quick to pick up on it. Something is wrong. And as soon as the phone rings, a sense of panic ensues because they continue to be linked. This is the sort of link we're talking about. We're just putting a quantum mechanical name to it, entanglement. So given this, now I'll show you the last, just about to finish. There have been quite a few studies in the United States involving large groups of meditating experts. One we saw in Washington, D.C. There's been a long-standing one that for 4 years, between 2006 and 2010, had 17, 18, 1900, 2000 people, which is enough, according to both theory and past experiment, to create a measurable influence on the whole country. This group, as you can see, is located in Fairfield, Iowa, which is right about here on the map. And this 4-year study was a wonderful opportunity to do research. There are 4 major scientific publications that emerged from it, published in peer-reviewed journals. Here it is in 2016. The number of meditators jumped to a level that we would predict should have an influence on the whole United States. And starting from at that point, we saw a dramatic downturn in the murder rates, rates of violent crime, and urban murder rates, and drug-related deaths and drug abuse. All these measures of societal stress went down in a highly statistically significant way. In this particular case, resulting when the group was disbanded in 2000 and later in the early 2010s, a significant return to higher crime rates that we've been suffering with ever since. When this was studied, in fact, when the group was in place, even before the published studies emerged, there were major headlines all over the US. You might remember, this is from 2006 when the group just started. Major cities, plummeting crime rates, mystifying. Violent crime, this is in the Washington Post. Violent crime has plummeted in major cities across the country, a trend criminologists describe as baffling and unexpected. Well, why baffling and unexpected? Well, this is just about the time of the financial crisis where it began and deepened. And this is where you tend to see more crime traditionally, more stress, more anxiety, more robberies, more burglaries. Experts did not see this coming at all. Criminologists mostly now agree that the long-held belief that crime is connected to the economy is false. So if we actually look at what happened, you can see, I hope, the red lines that cross the entire United States showing a measurable influence of reducing crime from these groups of a couple of thousand long-term meditators. They were spending many hours a day deep in their practice. It wasn't for their own benefit they spent so much time. The purpose was really to have a societal benefit. And those red lines are pretty strong across the entire United States, and they persist into Canada, although at a reduced intensity. They do not penetrate the Mexican border. And this is long before Trump's hypothetical border wall. There was a cultural border at the boundary, different languages, different news outlets. The daily life of the people in Mexico are largely unknown to most Americans. And you see that the lack of cultural bond or affinity there dampened the influence of the US meditators on those groups. So again, to wrap this up, quantum entanglements among humans, our ability to have an influence on someone at a distance, it depends on the frequency and the intimacy of their interactions, and therefore the strength of their cultural bonds. It's a very different model from the previous model of human interaction, which was basically a physical model where, we could basically influence somebody as far as we could reach them or perhaps shout at them. And this deeper quantum mechanically based model of human interaction takes advantage of the fact that mind, by its very nature, is a quantum mechanical system, and therefore the ability to create bonds, what are called entanglements with people and across cultures, is automatically explains a long-range continuing connection between different peoples and cultures. So summary, this physics of social coherence, or this physics of reducing crime and social violence through large meditating groups, quantum mechanics provides a known mechanism for such long-range human-to-human interactions. This mechanism does not depend on distance. Does not depend rigorously on distance, such that it would fall off gradually, but it depends more on cultural affinity, which is consistent with extensive published research, a few examples of which I showed. This mechanism, quantum mechanics thus provides a natural understanding of a phenomenon we can call collective consciousness. Every city in the country has its own feeling. Washington, very different from New York City. New York City, very different from Atlanta, from San Francisco. You go to a city, you fly to a country, you fly to India, get off the plane. By the time you've reached the baggage check, you feel you're in a different universe. And that's what we call the collective consciousness, which depends on the collective level of stress and other qualities of the people. So quantum mechanics provides a natural understanding for this web of collective consciousness and the long-range field effects of consciousness seen in this brain-based approach to peace. And now that we've seen the empirically demonstrated effectiveness of this approach and to some degree, the scientific research and theory behind it, I suggest now we really take advantage of it. I suggest we use it. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hagelin. I know many of you have to leave for lunch and classes. If you have questions for Dr. Hagelin, you can actually, I'm going to give this to everyone, you can email me, bob@davidlynchfoundation.org, and I will pass them on. See, Dr. Hagelin, I didn't give him your address. bob@davidlynchfoundation.org, and I will pass them on to Dr. Hagelin. I also would like to say, Dr. Hagelin is a man who is a Harvard-trained quantum physicist and really on a trajectory with unified field theories. The decision you made 25 years ago or more now to really delve deeply into understanding these deep principles of consciousness and matter, consciousness and physiology has had a powerful influence of transformation. Most of the research you're seeing on transcendental meditation in all these different areas, health, veterans, etc., has been either led or propelled forward by you, Dr. Hagelin. And so the fact that you've taken so much time with other physicists and physiologists and brain scientists to come up with this brain-based approach to peace, and I'm also well aware of your work over all these years, how it's constantly evolving and developing and new insights coming forth. We're very, 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 very grateful for your work and your leadership and with everything that you're doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert.
I want to conclude by just saying one thing before I turn it over to Jeffrey Abramson to thank us all, and that is the work that Dr. Hagelin has done and has been doing for all these years caught the attention of Ray Chambers, who many of you know. Ray Chambers is a special envoy for the United Nations, special envoy with the UN Secretary General's Agenda for Health 2030, particularly his work in malaria and now inflammation. And Ray has been a big supporter and donor to a lot of Dr. Hagelin's research, including that meditation project in Washington, D.C. Well, now what's happening is Ray Chambers and the David Lynch Foundation and other visionary thinkers are working to establish what we call cities of peace. Ultimately 100 cities of peace in small towns and large cities all over the world. If we could see just some of these videos where to be a city of peace, you'd have a school, you'd have 10,000 kids meditating in schools. And here are just, this is in Mexico, that's not 10,000. If you could just, this is in India. Already these have been established, Mexico. This is a military in Ecuador, more Mexico, Bolivia, Curacao. And the purpose here is, okay, there's theories. Okay, science, John Wolfe, science needs to go plunge more deeply into understanding what's happening, if it's happening. But Ray and the David Lynch Foundation, particularly the work of the Rona and Jeffrey Abramson Center for Peace, is to right now start establishing these large groups and create that effect. And part of that is to conduct rigorous research, before we introduce, we begin these 10,000 groups during and after. We hope to actually work with American University and other researchers to really come up with some clear guidelines and indices of what we would be studying. But Ray wants to make the United Nations, and with his wonderful cohort, Wendy McWeeny, wants to make the United Nations see that peace, real peace, is not just going to be created by like signing peace treaties or nation building or economic sanctions or just pushing people aside into camps. Real peace is going to occur when we can address the epidemic of trauma and toxic stress, which isn't just influencing us as individuals, but is really engulfing the world as a whole. And so the Abramson Center for Peace, Ray, Wendy, and others are working very diligently now to introduce a new intervention, something that's been missing, waking up peace from the field of peace which lies within every human being, and then measuring its impact as it spreads throughout society. Yes, we need better health care. Yes, we need better economic conditions. Yes, we need better housing. Yes, we need clean water. Yes, we need to address the situation of malaria and other diseases. But if we ignore the epidemic of trauma and toxic stress, which cannot be addressed by a pill, it cannot be addressed by a pill, we will never succeed. But by adding this technology, which Dr. Hagelin and so many others here have been speaking about, we can make a very significant impact in changing our world. We actually want to teach 10,000 kids, students here in Washington, D.C. to meditate, and some of them around the government buildings. And then down the road, we would like to establish a university of peace. There's enough war colleges and defense institutions. They're needed. We love them. But a real university of peace where the students will study the most cutting-edge theories and principles of peace from all universities. But each student will be a peace creator within herself or himself and help to creating an influence of peace in the world. So I am very, very grateful to all of you for watching this, for attending, for sitting through this long summit, but I think it was very, very valuable. Ray would like us to now bring this to the United Nations in the new year, which I think will be very, very timely. I also want to thank Kathleen and Wesley for putting on, and Ina for putting on an amazing event, making this happen. And all the video, everybody with audio is so flawless and fluid and great, really grateful. And a big round of applause to Candy Crowley, who we just love.
Thank you, Bob. I think UNESCO sums it up well. It says in its charter, quote, "Since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed." I think this is what we've been hearing time and again today, the awakening of the constructs of peace and how it can happen in a very simple and natural way through a meditation practice like Transcendental Meditation. The David Lynch Foundation, the Abramson Center for Peace, look forward to working with other extraordinary organizations, veteran service organizations, schools, universities, community projects, refugees, the UN, all whole governments, create groups for peace. That is our goal, and that these programs are made available to anyone as soon as possible, whoever wants them. I wanted to thank, again, the American University School of International Service, the David Lynch Foundation, your incredible staff of dedicated staff, Candy Crowley as well. I can't think enough about how much I love Candy. You make everything succinct. All our speakers, I'm very moved by all our speakers, just how through their dedication, without that dedication, we would not be able to understand the future of America and our world. I think in conclusion, I think we can all say, There truly is a new science for peace. Thank you very much for coming.
And let's get 10,000 kids meditating in Washington, D.C. right away. Let's make Washington, D.C. truly the first city of peace. Thank you all.